Thank you for watching Fireside. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider liking and subscribing to be notified when future episodes release. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fireside. Joining us today is a legendary developer in the old school RuneScape space, someone who started as a content dev half a decade ago and rose up the ranks, becoming a principal systems designer responsible for the Tomes of Amasket, Bassani's Nightmare, Raging Echoes, Araxor, Group Iron Man, and much more. Welcome, Mod Arcane, to Fireside.
Very much. It's quite funny watching all your podcasts and you're like leveling up the intros every single time.
Yeah,
I'm becoming your thing.
Eventually it's gonna, I'm gonna have to like read off a page, a scripted page of everything I but thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you're doing well today.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Excited to dig in for hours of RuneScape.
Yes, exactly. First of all, though, I guess we'll touch on the most recent announcement, which was or announcements, the Winter Summit. Congratulations on that. That was a fun watch, and it's an exciting year ahead for both versions of RuneScape. How are your feelings about post Winter Summit 2026?
I'm feeling pretty good, yeah. Like obviously we're reading through a lot of the feedback and there's some concerns around like pures and TFA, which we can talk about at some point, and like the requirements and things like that. But overall, the thing that I was the most nervous about is like, will people like the thematic, like the direction we're going with raids for in terms of like the direction in terms of gameplay, like difficulty, grouping, whatever, like all those sides of things. But also, yeah, like the thematic, the vibe. Since obviously no one was really expecting this, right? People were expecting like a Fremenic raid or a sailing raid or whatever else, right? And I'm not saying those are bad ideas, and I think we still really want to do those one day. But we kind of just thought it wasn't really the right time. So that was the thing that I was the most nervous about. Like, are they going to like this direction? Because that's something that I've been pushing for, and I quite believed in.
And I know that you obviously had because you joined the OSRS team post TOB, but I know that this raid is specifically one that is looking to kind of harken back to TOB in some ways. I know there's more than enough discourse about it. I think you guys did a good job of like summarizing what to expect. Is there anything like that hasn't been mentioned that you kind of want to just like throw in there in regard to like the inspirations for this raid, what you guys are going for this raid? Because I always feel like this is the first raid in the OSRS space that feels like it's reminiscent of another one, or at least like that's the impression I get. But like every other raid so far, all three of them have been drastically different, right? We have the roguelike version that's like Chambers of Xeric. We have the more boss gauntlet-y version of the TOB, and then we have kind of like a pick your path kind of raid with TOA. Can you maybe touch on that for a moment?
Yeah, so I think in general, the entire old school team with most updates, we don't really want to try and be too formulaic, and often that can be the case where we'll like release a quest and we'll have a repeatable boss behind it. We'll do a I can't really think of loads of examples off the top of my head because we try to avoid it really. But my point is like it's very easy to fall in a trap of going like, oh, this worked, let's do it again and again and again. And that's why we try and do quite different things. That's why TOB was different, TOA was different. That's why we try and do like lots of different things all over the shop, really. And that's why TOA tried to push the boat in quite a lot of different angles, right? Like it had obviously invocations, it tried to be the more like accessible raid, it tried to do something different with like how you like pick rooms and things like that, and the whole like room leveling system that didn't really quite work out. Obviously it has puzzles and things like that. It tried to do quite a few different things because we want ideally every raid to have like their own unique identity and their own reason and their own things to like and things to dislike, because we think that makes the game better overall. If every raid was like TOB, I think everyone would agree that probably start to get repetitive and probably not be great. Like obviously the bosses would feel different, the rewards would be different, etc. The thematics, the vibes. There's a lot you can do that makes it feel fresh. But again, the formula itself, trying to iterate on that and make them different significantly, we think is a good shot most of the time. But I think after TOA, as much as it's very hard for me to like not look at TOA and like regret a lot of choices, because that's just how I look at most of my updates. I'm like, oh, I wish I did a million things differently, right? And I do think the end game community in particular, TOA definitely didn't really land. It was fine and it was good in a lot of angles, but it didn't quite scratch like the grinding long term itch that even Cox and TOB kind of nailed in reality, especially TOB. So I think we're a little bit worried that we tried to do many different things again, and we like fail again, and like we disappoint those players. And we think those players have been a little bit underserved, or so more than recent. So we want to make sure that they've got something they're like really happy with, and like that they're the focus group here. Again, TOA tried to make quite a lot of different groups happy, and in general, when you try and do that, you make individual groups less happy. You're kind of splitting yourself thin a bit. So
Yeah, I definitely agree
it
with
really
that.
isn't. That's the goal.
No, I 100% agree with that. I think that TOA is awesome in so many different ways. I've always maintained that like TOA within like the 300 to 350 invocation range, when you're just doing insanity on Warden, you're not like, it's not, everything's not jacked up in regard to the health pulls, defense, and all that kind of stuff. That's like the sweet spot for TOA. It is like genuine. I think 300 to 350 TOA is my favorite raid. Like I really loved learning that space. And of course, as many have pointed out, the deeper you go into TOA, the more punishing and long it becomes. So you don't get that sense of
Yep.
improvement you would in like a Chambers as Eric or a TOB. So I'm very excited to see how you guys approach difficulty, because I think having multiple difficulties is fine. But definitely when it becomes this like linear scaling kind of paradigm that we saw in TOA, there are some problematic features with that. My sweet spot personally is always just like 2 or 3 difficulties. Make like an
Yep.
insane like Radiant Oathblade tier hard mode. Make like a standard difficulty that pushes people to their not to their limits, but to challenges them in that succinctly, and then an entry mode that introduces people to the raid and the mechanics while still offering some level of reward. I always like the idea of having like an entry mode unique, not a unique exclusive to entry mode, but an entry mode unique that you could obtain and be happy with just while learning the raid too. Stuff like that is cool. So I'm very interested to see what you guys do with that.
Yeah, I imagine if we do end up doing various different modes, which isn't necessarily what we're doing right now, I think it would most likely like 2 or 3 different modes,
Mhm.
as opposed to making a really granular system. I really like it on paper, like invocations, like the idea that you get comfortable and then you add just a little bit of difficulty and a little bit of difficulty. And there's a lot of like roguelike games that do a lot of similar stuff like this to great success. I just think when things like drop rates get involved and how our game doesn't really have like a combat slash progression system like a ARPG roguelike does, I think it starts to just fall on its face a little bit. And you definitely saw a lot of the cracks with TOA that the invocation really highlighted. But again, people do generally like that system for that benefit. They do generally like that progression of like amping it up more and more. But maybe it should have just been like 0 to 300. Maybe it should have been like 150 to 300. And then after that, it was like a lot less granular. Maybe we shouldn't have tried to go the whole like 0 to 600, basically.
I really
A
like
lot of things.
TOA's position as like a more of a mid game entry point for raids is wonderful, because and I know we had that quality of life changes to the bosses and stuff to make them a little bit less punishing, because yes, some of the bosses were definitely like really intense in TOA, but like uh, from a boss to boss standpoint, I really love the fights in TOA. They're very like intuitive,
Yeah.
and that's a word I love. I love just being able to look at a fight and kind of understand, piece together what needs to be done just visually instead of having to, go to a video. And so in that sense, TOA is a great entry point to like the modern space of PvM, and that's kind of like what I really want to touch on with you here is the, I guess, different eras of old school RuneScape PVM and just RuneScape PVM, and if you perceive that like there's future evolutions that can be done in the same sense of like the difference we saw between like a God Wars 1, a Zulrah, and then eventually a TOB and then TOA, like the different design philosophies applied to those different eras. Do you see future evolutions in OSRS following that trend, like a new generation of PVM design? And if you do, what does that look like in your eyes?
I want to, before we go into that, I want to grab that word you used, then
Mhm.
intuitive,
Yeah, of
because
course.
it's actually kind of an interesting topic internally and something we've been kind of retroactively thinking about is we obviously with TOA we tried to make a lot of the fights more intuitive, more readable, etc. And that's really good from like so many different angles. However, with one very specific perspective, I think it's actually worse. And And that's kind of like the whole day one, like world race to world first learning experience. TOB was like awfully not intuitive. Like most of those bosses are incredibly obtuse. I don't think it really suffered that much for it. I think long term, it didn't really matter much because at the end of the day, our game is incredibly wiki dependent, and I'm not really opposed to like leaning into that to some degree. That's not to say I want just like intentionally obtuse mechanics that are just frustrating for the sake of it. But I think there's something sort of interesting about like walking into Bloat for the first time and just running up to him and he just wipes your entire team in 3 seconds because that's not how you're supposed to tackle that. You're supposed to wait until he goes down and then actually go and tackle him then. Like a lot of the fights in TOB were like that. And I think if you tried to make Bloat like really intuitive, I think you would lose something there. I think you'd lose some of the magic. I think you'd lose some of the interest. I think you'd lose potentially even some like emergent gameplay because you probably have to script it a bit more and make it a bit more formulaic or structured in some way. And I think, yeah, you do end up losing something there. So that's something we've been trying to think about with TFA is like, how do we have that like day one experience where there are like some quite punishing mechanics that aren't entirely telegraphed, but then like as soon as you die to them, you kind of understand it. Like that's almost the important part, right? You don't want to die and still not understand why you died. And that's something we're being really careful of. But we want to make sure we kind of capture that like day one, week one experience. Because as much as it isn't the ultimate end goal for the raid, the ultimate end goal for the raid is that it's fun, like 500 KC, 1000 KC in. That's like the most important thing. We want to try and satisfy both those camps. Yeah. I don't know if you have any extra thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from, and I've always like, intuitiveness is kind of a catch-all in some ways because it's the same kind of vibe as QOL, quality of life, right? There's and I talk about this in my upcoming video, which probably is out by the time this is out, where there's always like you can't just keep adding quality of life on top of quality of life because ultimately that just smooths the game out to the point where no one really finds it engaging anymore. And there's many games that have suffered from this entire genres cough cough have suffered from this, and like the idea there is that it's a fine line between like what is intuitive, what is approachable versus what it like is still demanding and still full of like that kind of like self-discovery, that rewarding like, oh, if I try this, would this work? Like that level of self-discovery is I think something that works really well with old school RuneScape. So I definitely see where you're coming from, and I think that honestly, like as someone who learned TOB very recently, like only just a month or two ago, and now I have over 100 KC in TOB, I can say, TOB is certainly has some intuitiveness issues, but other than that, I feel like the level of the quote unquote unintuitiveness that exists in TOB is not too bad. I think the main the probably one of the main points of issues problems I have with TOB just from like a moment to moment standpoint is just like some of the projectiles hitting you like one tick before they look like they're going to hit you, like on Soda Tech, for example. We have to just get accustomed to that. You're accustomed to like the more like really tightly tuned looking projectiles in like a TOA, and in TOB it feels a little bit like you're still kind of the team was still discovering this kind of like on hit kind of dynamic that was very new to RuneScape at the time. So beyond like stuff like that, which just requires a couple attempts to learn, it's pretty approachable in most situations. I really love like, the web running mechanic in Verzik is just really exciting to nail down and learn. And things like that to me might not exist in a really, really scripted encounter, as you pointed out. So there's definitely a validity to that. And I'm sure we'll touch on that later on. I don't want to like move a topic if there's more to say about this though.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like Zarpus P3, like you only learn that by dying in reality.
Yeah.
Like, he just screeches and starts looking at corners, and you're supposed to understand that you're not supposed to attack him when he's facing the corner, right? And it's very easy to say that that's what the solution is now, but you watch like day one launch day, videos, and like people are just dying left, right, and center. And thankfully, before Scythe, it was very hard to just insta kill yourself as Zarpus P3. I think usually it does like 30 or 40 damage or something, which is survivable. But with Scythe, obviously, you just instantly kill yourself. There's a couple of mechanics like that, like Blow. Obviously, all those spiders and Maiden come out. and you're not ready for freezing or anything, like that's effectively a wipe, like immediately. At least, again, that's somewhat intuitive. Oh, spiders came out, we got to stop the spiders. But there's a lot of mechanics in TOB, and not even TOB, just older content, really, that you learn by failing rather than you're learning by like just looking at the mechanic, so to speak. And
Actually,
I do
then
think there's something good there.
on this topic, then I rather than going into PVM evolution, I'd love to get your thoughts on probably I don't want to say the biggest barrier to entry, but like one of the biggest ones. Specifically, I speak for my group. I'm my partner here, who was very new to old school RuneScape when we both. I mean, we were both new to old school, but like I was more familiar with it, I guess. Than he was. He straight up. I met him playing World of Warcraft in 2016. Essentially, and we ran a guild together. So and we're like really good buddies now. So we quit WoW and we jumped into OSRS together in 2024. And one of his biggest like initial hurdles when first learning the game was on hit versus on animation. I don't know what the other way to phrase that.
Yeah.
Not mechanics, but like, you know, hit registration. I know he was crashing the fuck out in the fight caves when he first did those, you know, a couple months into our journey. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I always go back and forth on my perspective on this. On one hand,
Yeah.
kind of hate it. On the other hand, I can split it between old and new content. But on the other hand, a lot of new content also does it too, like in Coliseum. So like, which I recently did as well. So I'm very mixed on that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that design in general.
I think overall the game is better off with us designers having the flexibility to use either. You get so much more. You can create much more like tightly. How do I describe it? Like I feel like we have more levers to create more tight encounters by having either or, and a variety in like in terms of animations, visuals, like how players are expected to react and stuff like that. I think is important. I think if we just had one or the other, so many attacks would end up feeling really similar. Like, because if you think about it with Jad, if you could prey on hit rather like on animation, you would almost have like an extra 2 or 3 ticks to react, right?
Yeah.
And that would make that fight significantly easier. So then you would either, if you wanted to balance that, you would either make the animation a lot quicker, which I'm sure our animators would be very unhappy about because it's very hard to get like weighty animations in a shorter amount of time, and express like proper movements and things like that. Or you would make the projectiles really quick, and sometimes the projectiles would probably just look comically fast at that point if they're supposed to just be like 1 tick or something, which again probably just look a bit stupid. Um, so I feel like us having the flexibility to use either is good. I completely appreciate that it is really confusing and in basically just some intuitive video game bullshit you got to figure out by trial and error and research. RuneScape is not. Old School has a lot of this. Old School has so much like randomly unintuitive bullshit, and we iron out some of it when we think it's not appropriate, but a lot of it's just like the jank that we love, and you can almost like describe it as depth in a really obtuse way.
There's depth to it. 100%. I always view it as like an external and an internal process. That's the difference. The external one is like a reaction driven process where you're reacting to a projectile hitting you. And you're like, you know, that's the speed. And then there's an internal process, which is like, you know, I don't know, doing a pillar solve in Coliseum or the Inferno, where you're off ticking something consciously. And that's not they're not, you could say they're driven by visuals because maybe, oh, when the ranger starts moving, that's when you know to switch to mage if you're off ticking those. But like, it's essentially an internal process in how you're considering it and then you're planning around it. I'm still very like, I don't know how I feel about it. There's definitely, but it definitely does add a lot of depth and complexity, quite frankly, to the game, both unintuitively and in like a rewarding fashion, right? Like there's a reason why the Inferno is so many people's favorite content in the entire game, right? Like I can't necessarily relate to that, but there's so many people that love it that I'm not gonna sit here and be like, well, it needs to change. Like no, like it clearly has so much value to so many different people that I wouldn't feel right to just be like, oh, I just started playing and I didn't find it intuitive, so better change it. Like that wouldn't be the appropriate choice there either. It's just always interesting to see how that's adapted to modern encounters, right? Like you have the Inferno 2016, really kind of crazy, trend setting in some ways, I guess evolutionary in others, considering it's a sequel to the Fight Caves. Really interesting kind of piece of content for the time. Very, very difficult. Arguably, still some of the hardest content in the entire game. And then you have the Colosseum that came out. And the Colosseum is like I wouldn't say it's an evolution. It's more of like an iteration or a new take on it. And how involved were you in the creation of the Colosseum, out of curiosity?
Um, Before we answer that one, I
Mhm.
want to just answer something else you're talking
Of
about.
course.
But I think I think almost like a perspective of why I think old school probably gets away with stuff like this is that the the ratio of time you spend frustrated by lack of intuitiveness is so small in old school RuneScape because of obviously the grindy nature, MMO, etc., compared to like if God of War had every mechanic be really unintuitive and across the entire encounter, it's like a 20-hour game or something like that. You'd probably feel that and the frustration would outweigh like any of the good times, right? But
Yeah.
because like let's say you do Muspa, you're frustrated for like 5 KC and then you send 500. Like it's just negligible in reality, right? And whilst I don't think that necessarily justifies into unintuitiveness existing, it's probably what lets us get away with it. And the end of the day, us getting away with it means we have like more tools, more flexibility, and we can almost like make a better game in other ways. It's just like everything in life I find is just like it's like a balance of like you lose something, you gain another thing, and in this case, we're losing intuitiveness and gaining a bunch of like design tools and cool animations and more flexibility and stuff like that. And maybe that outweighs it in this case, right?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I
Uh,
can I can definitely appreciate that argument. Yeah.
in terms of the Coliseum, I did a game jam project called Tazakal Trials. I think it was my first or second game jam. We'd only really just started doing them. I think before that it was called like Tap or something else. I think Jagex has for a very long time had these programs internally where devs get a bit of time away from like normal work and have a time to explore their own creative ideas. And yeah, game jam was just one of them, at least for the time that I'd been at Jagex. And yeah, one of my first James Jam was a project called Tazakal Trials, and I don't know if you've like watched a prior podcast or anything, but I had like a really cringe CV that I applied to Jagex with that had
Mhm.
like Tazkal Zook on it and my Inferno KC and a bunch of other dumb stuff, and clearly it worked. I managed to get Mod Kieran's attention, the creator of Inferno, with
Yeah.
this really cringe Inferno CV. But I was obsessed about Inferno. It was my favorite piece of content. I loved it so much. And the game jam Tactical Trials is basically just trying to be Inferno 2 and inspired from a PoE league mechanic called Ultimatum because I love that in PoE as well. I was trying to figure out like, is there a cool way to blend the two? Yeah, I made a game jam project. I quite liked it internally, but it didn't really go anywhere, like for various reasons. Eventually, Voldemort was getting planned, and I think it was Mod Ed was thinking, do you think we could use your Tazakal Trials game jam pitch and reskin it to be a Colosseum? Because thematically that fit a lot better for Voldemort. Blue Inferno. Which I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Um, at that point, my engagement kind of dropped off a lot. So like I did the initial pitch and the concepts and stuff like that, and then I wasn't really involved with the project for quite a long time. Then I did get pulled in towards the end to just kind of like bring it together a little bit, play test it a lot, balance it, make tweaks, and make a lot of like small changes, so to speak, just refine a couple of systems. But I think it was Mod Mac that did the vast majority of Coliseum development.
Yeah, it's a very interesting piece of content because I did it first. I I don't think you might be aware. I don't know why you would be anyway, but I did. I for the past like month and a half, 2 months, I've been like I wanted to max my account, getting there slowly, and I wanted to do like essentially just about all the hardest content I can. Um, Outside of like Radiant Oath Plate and Blorva because I'm Group Iron Man moment, but the but with that being said, I did the Colosseum, I did the Inferno, and I did the Colosseum first, which I'm very happy about, because I think the Colosseum is. I would say everybody should do the Colosseum first. It's shorter, it's a bit less frustrating in regard to its learning curve, even though it's mechanically I would say more hard. more difficult, after like wave 6 or so. Um,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting to see like what changed between the Colosseum and the Inferno, like the testing that was done. Um, some good, some bad. Like obviously it's similar to the Inferno. To me, a little bit surprisingly, right? Like the pillars being like a core functionality of the Colosseum. To me, was surprising that that was the direction taken, considering like that was such a defining trait of the Inferno, and that's not necessarily what existed in the fight caves. So just on the pillars alone, is that something you see going forward in like future incarnations of the challenge? Eventually, when we get the Mage Cape, I guess, the Mage Fire Cape, Mage Inferno Cape, whenever that does happen, do you see like, okay, we're gonna do the pillars, 3 pillars, 4 pillars, whatever it may be?
I don't think there's anything like locking us into it at all. I think like during the development of Coliseum, we initially wanted it to be a little bit more different in terms of like that core gameplay loop of like safe spotting monsters and things like that. And we wanted to make that feel a little bit different. We didn't make it feel a little bit different, but I think very early on we tried to have like what are they called? It was like moving pillars basically. We had like
Hmm.
NPCs covered in shields that would move left and right, left and right.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing some
And
concept art of that.
yeah, and we wanted it to be like, yeah, we get aggroed and you might have to move from like one pillar to another, like behind these like moving things, and that'd be like how you solve stuff. It was just shit. It was just really not good. Like it just felt really poor. So we got rid of it, and then we're like, okay, like can this work like without pillars? Like, is there an interesting angle we can do without pillars? And it just kind of felt like more shallow. Like it felt like we just had like this good formula and just taken out an interesting element and not really replaced it with anything. And you can have like more interesting monsters and stuff, but the pillars just add so much to that encounter and like to the mechanics of Inferno and Colosseum. So like we're trying to replace that with something else. It almost feels like the whole area locked league system, like where we've just not thought of anything that's better than area locked for like a core system for a league. We've not thought of anything better than safe spotting monsters
Pillar
for
locked.
like a wave based minigame like that. It just adds so much value. Um, so I'm not saying we're not going to
I
think of
definitely
anything
understand
else,
that.
but
Yeah, I can definitely sympathize with that. I will say that while eventually, initially I was like, oh, it's pillar stuff again, even though it was my first thing. But I was aware of the Inferno. But on the other hand, I grew to appreciate a lot of other changes that were made with the Colosseum. For example, and this is probably the biggest and most immediate change you notice, is that it's it's 11 or 12 waves as opposed to 69. Nice. So like I'm wondering like that felt like the most conscious like effort to not make it as you know for lack of a better term tedious as a lot of early Inferno, like the first like 40-ish waves in the Inferno. You can min-max them, but generally speaking, for your first cape you are going for safety over tech, and that creates like this really long period in the Inferno where you're just kind of sitting around, taking it really slowly, kind of bored, and then eventually, and then try not to waste your supplies because you lose focus or because you're not whatever ADHD brain like I have, right? While the Colosseum, it kind of there's still that small ramp up period. The first 4 or so waves are a bit boring, but like it kind of gets into the meat faster. It's funny because that to me makes it overall probably easier than the Inferno, but it does make it, I guess, maybe less frustrating or punishing when you do end up dying to soul or a wave spawn.
yeah, I don't think this is I don't think this is really solvable, but it's something we've thought about a lot, especially when we were doing the Colosseum. And so Inferno's got like two difficulty gates, right? You've got obviously being good at the waves, being good at Zuck, but also just like stamina, like not making a lot of mistakes over a long period of time, conserving your resources. And that also promotes like gear and stats and like how good at prayer flicking you are and like all these other factors. And that's really cool from like a progression point of view of your account. When you only have 12 waves, like the whole stamina aspect kind of just gets kind of voided to a certain degree. Like you're not really going for stamina. You can make loads of mistakes and you're probably still going to have enough supplies to go on. Unless mechanics just do an ungodly amount of damage, right, to make up for it. Like if you're taking 5 damage away on average in Inferno, and that adds up to a meaningful amount over 9 waves, how much damage do we need to do in 12 ways to make up for that, right? Is it 4 or 5 times more damage? And then does that create new issues because now individual mistakes are too punishing and feel unfair and they're frustrating within themselves? Is that better? Is that worse? I don't really know. But you do, again, you start to pull on the constraints of having too few waves to actually create your supplies and make your supplies actually matter. Bringing like 20 brews into an encounter genuinely trivializes anything, right? Like, I'm sure when Raids 4 launches, we can make really punishing mechanics. We can, as punishing as we can realistically do before they just become stupid. We could make loads of supply drains and stuff like that. We could make it so we don't give you a lot of supplies. It's very hard to stop a player just brute forcing the entire game with just 20 brews in their inventory, right? And just bringing very, very minimal switches. And that's not necessarily a problem, but especially again for like day one, week one experience, players very much feel underwhelmed if that's how it happened, right? Like if players got through Coliseum day one just by just drinking brews and ignoring mechanics, I wouldn't feel very good, right?
Yeah.
So Inferno solved that with long waves. Coliseum solved that with just doing a lot of damage. I don't know what's better. Personally, I quite like the long waves of Inferno. I know that's unpopular, but I quite like it's almost like therapeutic. Like you turn your brain off a little bit, you turn on some music, and you wind up, and then you get to like 31. Things get a little bit more real, and then you get to like the 60s, and they get really real, and you switch on for a bit. Like I think the variety and intensity is really good. And then obviously it peaks like at 68, 69 with like a Zook and everything, where one mistake could just kill you. Like I think that's great. I don't think Coliseum really has that. I think it's more of like a fairly low into fairly medium into fairly high, and it's like it doesn't have as much variety in it. But you're kind of splitting hairs. They're both good in their own ways.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I mean, and to be clear, a part of the reason why I'm grateful I did the Coliseum first is because I mean the Inferno took me 13 attempts. No, I think yeah, 10, 13, something around there attempts wise. And I feel like that would be a lot greater, a lot more if I didn't first learn pillar solves and all that kind of stuff with the Coliseum.
Definitely.
And I think that and yeah, as you pointed out, like literally for the first like 50 or so waves, I was just kind of watching videos on the other monitor. But like when those 50, when you get through those 50 and you're like, okay, I'm getting into it now, like obviously then you're really focusing in and not trying to save resources, doing the solves correctly as good as you can, and all that kind of stuff. Something I want to touch on is randomization within encounters, which really applies to both Inferno and Coliseum, but applies to a lot of different encounters. I think randomization is a spice of life. You know, it's very helpful to making encounters feel fresh. If things feel too static, like some I guess encounters do feel this way. I think maybe that's a point of criticism someone could have to like TOA, right? Like some TOA encounters feel really static, while others don't. And there's a level of like appeal there because it kind of it makes you lean in and lean out at any given time. But I would say, and this could be a total hot take, is I feel like the randomization in the Coliseum is a bit too much. That would be my like one of my criticisms. It's multi-layered, right? You have the randomization, first of all, of just like the general randomization of old school RuneScape. Do you hit a 1, a 0, or a 50? You know, like that alone is a level of RNG there. Then you have, you know, the invocation system affixes, or I think they're just called invocations for Coliseum. Those are really black and white sometimes, right? Like you can just get 3 of the invocations that every guide says just give up and go, especially if it's your first Coliseum, just give up. You know, the Minotaur one, the B one, and maybe like a 2 or 3 Doom. Like it's your first Coliseum, give up, claim, start again. That really sucks, especially if you're doing well. And then on top of all of that, you have the wave spawn RNG. If you're doing, my God, my cardinal directions, Southwest Pillar. Some of the wave spawns are essentially just kind of like, okay, well, this is where the run ends, kind of for a first time player. To the point where like you're not even processing what's learning, and it's like a difficulty goes from like a 3 to a 9, based on the spawn that you're getting, the 1 in 7 double, my God, my cardinal directions, double west. Is it called the double west, double south, double north, whatever it is? Yeah, double south. Yeah, my God, it's horrifying. And you can get like a wave 11 brick because of that. And to me, that like that pendulum swings from like a 3 out of 10 in the difficulty to a 9 out of 10, which to me is maybe a bit too much. Like a between a 4 and a 7, a 4 and a 6, between a 7 and a 9, that all works really great based on the kinds of mechanics you're dealing with. But when it goes from like a I'm coasting, I'm having a good time, I'm playing well, to like a, oh, this is the part where I just die. And you get a a shockwave, a minotaur, and you have to off tick both them, and like brutal. Brutal. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on randomization within encounters, how it's implemented in the Inferno, Coliseum, and just the game in general. What's your take on it?
Talking about Colosseum first, and she gave some good examples there.
Mhm.
I'm not ultimately really familiar with Colosseum, like as a player. Like I helped work on it, but I've not like grinded it out or anything like that. But the the spikiness was like definitely intentional. Like that was like the goal through it. Like they was supposed to be like have really high highs and really low lows. I think the double south spawn, from what I understand about it, because I've definitely watched a lot of videos and stuff like this, is probably a little bit too far and a little bit too frustrating. That one wasn't intended. That was just kind of like us picking what we thought was reasonable spawns and then playtesting it a bunch and going like, okay, we think these are all solvable. But I think there are some that are probably just a little bit too spiky. Um the modifiers, yeah, were definitely intended to be quite intentionally spiky. And the kind of the philosophy of that was like we kind of want it to be where if you're really good at the Coliseum, you can do all of the modifiers, and that creates variety long term. Like sometimes you're gonna have runs that are fairly easy, sometimes you're gonna have runs that are really hard, and you're gonna sweat, and sometimes you're gonna have those runs that are really hard as soon as a unique appears. And you're like, then you're really sweating. Like you get the Ralos appear, or you get the pet or something, and then you get the modifier on the final wave that just completely like bricks your run. Then you're like really sweating. Like that's exactly like the emotions we're trying to get out of you. I would say it probably like succeeded on that measure. Whether that was the right goal or not in the first place is definitely up for debate, right? And I do think it heavily conflicts with the whole on-time completion. I think that philosophy that I just described, I do think theoretically, assuming players are generally up for that kind of gameplay, maybe our player base just isn't the player base for that type of experience. I don't know. Maybe it's too niche. And that holds up probably like GP per hour and stuff like that. And that's ignoring the drop table not being that strong. Entirely separate thing. But when it's about getting your first quiver, I think having that spikiness is just kind of shit. Reality. Like you're grinding for your first thing, you're learning it, and then yeah, like you said, most guides are gonna just say, yeah, if you get these modifiers, it's way too hard for you. It's probably better to just restart. That's not good. There's not
Yeah.
really much you can do about that outside of try not to cater to both things, right? Like maybe it shouldn't have been a GP per hour thing and should have been purely designed like Inferno about that one-time completion. Maybe it should have purely focused on GP per hour and it wouldn't have had that problem as much about people trying to get their quiver. But they're again conflicting goals there a bit.
I think there was like some interesting design with the glory that maybe could have been like, I don't know, just total armchair game dev. Like I like the idea of more difficult modifiers that were intended to be more difficult, like the Minotaur not being able to be safe spotted anymore. That one is really challenging to deal with, and like that one would be awarding more glory. And I feel like if glory had a greater incentive to earn, like if it had a cooler output, not just from a gold perspective, but like maybe some ornament kits you could get if you're like really stacked on glory or something like that. That would incentivize players to just focus in on those specific hyper challenging things. Like you go, oh yeah, I did a Coliseum with fucking bees, Doom 3, and the Minotaur one, and triple and triple Minotaur. Like it was crazy. And the double shockwave colossi and the Fremnik warband. Why not? Like it's crazy. And maybe if there was an incentive there to like push those rather than just kind of like, I guess maybe for the sake of GP per hour, you could, like if you're like no monkey or something, but like generally speaking, even pretty good players, I feel like get like a triple stack of like a really bad invocations, and they're like, you know what, I'll save the 10 minutes, I'll just restart. So maybe that there was something there, I think, with the glory system that was kind of interesting, where like you could get unlocks or something like that from
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I think that was kind of the goal of the glory system. It's just it was already a really complicated project to balance. So having like glory as like an extra balancing lever of like if it was going to be GP per hour or anything else, something we kind of wanted to stray away from because we knew that would probably just go wrong in some way. I think you could have definitely pushed like cosmetics a bit more and like just maybe encourage people to some degree to just almost intentionally regular runs. But I don't think that's probably a good idea either. Like, I don't think we probably want people to encourage like really fun gameplay if that's the goal of it. Obviously, you could argue then why do we even have the modifiers in the first place? But again, it's for that variety's sake. I think we
Yeah,
could have probably
yeah.
done a better just job on just the modifiers in general. Like they could have been hard, but just more interesting instead of just oppressive.
That's
But
always yeah, I definitely agree with that one. Like making things hard but not just frustratingly hard. That's a really fine difficult balance to
it
strike.
is, yeah. If we
I,
spent a lot more time on it, I think we could have done it. Time's always the issue with every project in reality. I'm not saying like we're crunching or anything, but at the end of the day, we have to decide: do we spend an extra like a month balancing Colosseum, or do we work on the next like Grandmaster quest or whatever? Right? Like
yeah.
one thing's always going to sap time from another. So we thought like, okay, this is pretty solid. We'll move on. But yeah, if we spent an infinite amount of time, we could have made that infinitely better. I know. Yeah, the inspiration was from Ultimatum and PoE, and it works so well in that game. But I do think it works better in that game because it's kind of an expectation that you just kind of die sometimes in that game, and it's okay. Like, and that's not really a problem. I don't think old school's that kind of game. If you just randomly die, you're justifiably very upset, very angry, especially if it took you like 30 minutes in the Coliseum. In PoE, if you get halfway through an ultimatum and just get one shot, you're losing like a minute of your life, and you just go back in. You didn't really lose anything at all. You just
Yeah,
carry on.
it's the
Um,
difference of how punishing something is, and I want to touch on some of these PoE comparisons in a moment too. The last thing I want to say about the Colosseum and Inferno, another like I guess big change between the two was obviously shortening them down, but giving actual loot, not just for completions, the guaranteed piece, the back piece, but actual loot between waves, which adds more pressure because you're risking it, kind of like a proto Doom in some ways, but on the other hand, it's reminiscent of the RS3 version of Inferno, which similarly has shorter waves, is a bit more mechanically maybe demanding, although not maybe in the hard mode, and gives actual like rewards for completing the waves, from killing the creatures and all that kind of stuff that stacks up in a chest. In RS3, you don't risk it, but in OSRS you do, which is an interesting twist there. But I like the idea of adding rewards for each individual breakpoint and milestone and wave. That's cool. Now, are the uniques really great in the Coliseum? No, but it is an interesting concept there, and I'd love. Do you feel like that's something you guys want to carry over, or do you feel like it's a failed experiment?
I don't think we've received like loads of praise for those kind of systems. I definitely think Coliseum achieved what it was trying to do. I just don't think it really resonates with players that much. So I can't say we'll never do it ever again because we might think of another way to iterate on it and make it better and more maybe more palatable. But there's no current ideas of any projects that kind of want to use those systems like a Doom and Coliseum again.
Hmm.
Um, so
It's,
I don't know what the future will hold.
I'm a little sad about the Doom one because I really do love Doom. It's one of my favorite fights. And I do like the idea of like going down deeper. It's very thematic. Of course,
Yeah,
there's I think really big balancing limitations, right? I think a lot of even old school RuneScape players have probably seen screenshots of the enrage encounters in RS3 of like 200 kill streaks, and there's like
it's cool,
18.
right?
Yeah, it's cool, but there's also like 18,000 battle staffs in the reward chest. And you're like, what the fuck, you know? So you're
Yeah,
also like, how do we balance that, right? How can we make it really rewarding without also destroying the economy, either with bots or just really good players? There was an
if there's
interesting
anything
about
I've
yeah.
learned
Mhm.
from talking to RuneScape devs about all of their enrage systems, obviously working on Coliseum on Doom, even working on TOA with the invocation system of like how that scaled loot, and playing loads of my own games myself, is you can't really just scale loot infinitely, and you can't really scale loot to even match the difficulty either. Like it has to have like some really harsh diminishing returns or some cap or something like that. And though that always feels really bad in reality. It feels so bad with diminishing returns that like it's getting just as hard, but you're getting less loot. At some point, the game encourages you to leave earlier and then redo it rather than going deeper, right? So again, conflicting designs are that make it really difficult to actually bring to life. But conceptually, like I think everyone can agree, like they're just really cool, like infinitely scaling bosses, infinite delves, things like that are just really neat. I think Doom did a really good job on it overall. I think it explored what that system can be like in a fairly healthy way. I don't think it was too oppressive in any means, and I think it was you're still quite encouraged to go quite deep, quite regularly. So
Mhm.
I think he did a pretty good job, but yeah, I think pushing it much further than that might be quite difficult.
Yeah, it's something that just
Um,
might not translate as well. Like, and you're probably the one developer I've seen interviews from that. Oh, I feel like you're always cross referencing RuneScape to other games, which is healthy. I think that's a good thing to do. Keeping an eye on what the competitors are doing. I think sometimes there are creators, developers, whatever that don't do that enough and don't learn from their competition or just from games that they enjoy. And there's people maybe that might do it too much. Again, as always, balance is the key. But it's always interesting to hear your PoE comparisons. I know I'm guessing anyway, that you're a big PoE fan. Personally, I haven't played PoE 1 that much, but I played a ton of PoE 2. So I'm familiar with some of your references. And I'd love to hear like you're a big roguelike fan, right? And I feel like RuneScape,
yeah.
in some ways, would be very, I guess, not approachable.
I want to
It
do
would
a
map on,
roguelike in old schools so bad. Like
yeah,
genuinely, like I've been thinking about it for ages. And the fundamental problem I keep coming across, like at least with a roguelike in the main game, is like how does it not just entirely destroy progression? Because like
yeah,
in my mind, the best version of a roguelike is you go in with nothing and you get a bunch of modifiers and buffs or whatever and items, and you obviously have a bunch of challenges and you come out with it. But then A, it needs to have loot, right? It needs to have rewards. You have to have a reason to do it. And B, how do you like respect your accounts like progression before then? And like how do you balance around that? Gauntlet's a prime example of like ignoring most of your account's progression and giving you really good loot. And it does create a little bit of a problem. Like I think the Bowfer like rush is like fine, like outside of drop rates, like in terms of like it's a cool little skip and like progresses your account massively. But I think if we created an entire roguelike, it'd probably justify quite a lot of rewards, like maybe even close to like a raise quantity of rewards. Do we balance it around you having max stats? Is that okay? Um, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's a lot of questions there about like how does it not just ruin the progression of old school RuneScape, or is it just really underwhelming and barely has any rewards and no one cares about it?
yeah, that's super challenging because I think
Maybe
that
because you want to make loot relevant, right? Like if I had a
yeah,
scythe, it'd be quite cool if I could bring a scythe in. But then, are you balancing around a scythe or are you balancing around a whip? You can't really balance around both because they're like astronomically different. So you end up just it creates a bunch of problems. Is a reality. But I'd love to explore what it does, even if it's maybe its own game mode or something like that. Isn't actually in the main
that's what I
game.
was thinking, like some kind of like external, whether it's League 7 or maybe one of the newer kind of Gridmaster esque thing. But like I feel like you could do so much with a rogue like in RuneScape. You know, like everything, you just so much stuff can be randomized. You can add cool affixes to random drops, you know, like stuff that does break game balance if it's in within like the limited time game mode. I don't know, you kill a goblin, get their bronze spear, but it has like a crazy affix that makes it a one tick melee weapon. You're like, oh my god, that's really cool. That's a cool weapon. You know, like stuff like that could be just. I was thinking about that. I'm like, man, that would be really exciting because I think there's a lot of like horizontal and vertical systems that could inter overlap with a roguelike mode while in like the main game, because you're going in with nothing. That's, you know, the core of the roguelike. And I do think that like going in with a scythe would kind of, it wouldn't betray the concept of a roguelike, but it would definitely like hamper it in some ways, right? I think a cool thing
Yep.
about a roguelike would be going in, getting that like cool legendary weapon. You're like, oh my god, I'm cooking this run. Like I'm going god mode this run.
Yep.
There's a level of satisfaction there that I feel like would be lost if you could bring weapons. But as you said, if it's another gauntlet situation, for as much as I think the gauntlet's really cool, and I'd love to see maybe an even deeper version of it in like a roguelike fashion, it does create that weird bottleneck of like, well, I have 75 in my stats. I guess I can just go get 35 million in Alex and go get my Bofa. You know, that's like a
Yeah.
crazy situation there as well. I don't know how to balance that. Limited time game mode is my number one thing. I think leagues and stuff is the perfect opportunity for
A lot
crazy
easier.
stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I would do want to touch on, because you worked on Raging Echoes. And did you do any of the Echo Boss designs or anything like that?
Yeah, I worked on Leagues 4 and Leagues 5. I've been like softly involved with League 6, but not majorly. I just
Hmm.
helped like set the direction a little bit, but I've not actively been working on the project. But I am excited about that. I think it'll be really cool.
Yeah, I do have
I
a.
did
Oh yeah,
work on some. Sorry, go on.
no, 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 no. Please, please. let me know.
I was gonna say, yeah, I did work on some of the echo bosses. I think I did Jeremy, GG's, All, um, ABD. I don't remember what other ones there are.
I think there was Soul, Dagonauts, Grotesque Guardians, Thermonuclear Smoke Devil, which I've never done because Candor and Moment. But then there was Cerberus and Soul.
Cerberus
Might be
too.
missing one. Yeah.
I think I did 4 or 5 of them.
So when it comes to Echo bosses and they're just, I'm notoriously a giant lover of the Echo bosses. I think for the most part, all of them improve on the standard encounter. Maybe Soul notwithstanding, just because Soul is already like such an incredible encounter on its face. But like so many of them have improved older fights and made them way more amazing. I always call out the Calphite Queen. Grotesque Guardians is another one that I think is just so exciting and cool, honestly, in the Echo version, while the main game version is just kind of like, okay, like it's such a nothing encounter by comparison. So I know that there's some cool loot there. I know some of the design philosophies of like harder fight, make it maybe a bit faster or of similar speed. But can you walk me through whether if there was ever any consideration of adding some of these fights to the old school RuneScape or pulling them to the main game, like things like the Calphite Queen or the Grotesque Guardians? I think would just be an objective improvement over what exists today.
Yeah, I mean, I think like pretty much straight after Raging Echoes, like we saw the reception to them, and people were posting this all over Reddit, like oh, we want these, especially like things like KQ, where the existing fights are so lackluster. And please just swap it, please just swap it. And like on paper, like we really want to do it because we agree is the simple answer, right? Like we agree that these fights are almost objectively better and would be more fun. It asks a bunch of just weird questions, right? Like changing things in old school RuneScape is just fundamentally really difficult. And that's because people are generally used to things and they don't really want to change most of the time. So like you take KQ as an example. If we just changed it 1-to-1 and then maybe like nerf the stats a little bit on the new KQ, like brought down the defense a bit and the hit points because they bounced around echo weapons and relic like that, right? So we brought them down to be more like KQ. It's a lot more click intensive, and the fights like less punishing in some ways and more punishing in others. I think people would be okay with that, but I think there'd be a decent amount of players that are may be frustrated that they have to now learn like a more like engaging encounter compared to like the brain deadness of what it was before. And maybe that's just a niche amount of people, and we should just do it anyway. But I think that's kind of the worry that all of these bosses have people that are very used to them being like they were. So then the obvious answer to that is, okay, what about if it's just like a hard mode or a different version of it or something like that? And I think we could probably make those work. It's just very case by case. Like, I don't think we would want to just put quote unquote echo bosses in the main game, right? Like, we would want to think of a thematic, a way to make it appropriate. Like, Fosani's Nightmare has like its own thematic of like why this nightmare is technically different. There's an NPC that you can talk to. It's in a different area. Like we've tied it into the game properly. It's like it's got its own items as well, right? It's got the egg and the teleport, or I think the teleport's on regular Nightmare these days. But yeah,
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you out there.
Yeah, all good. But yeah, I think there's a question about it at least at some point. But yeah, like we would want to integrate it into the main game properly, and that's not a bad thing. Like I think that's okay. But obviously that means it's more work, and we need to figure out when and where, and then how it fits into the game. How do you balance drop rates around it as well? Like if the time to kill is longer because of like the structure of the fight, does that mean we need to like lower the drop rates and stuff like that? That's probably okay. I'm not saying anything here to like say like we can't do it because of these reasons. It's just like things we need to consider and things we need to figure out to actually do it. And I think the short of it is we've just not really got around to it. And we've just been doing other stuff. So especially after like the next Echo Boss or the next league comes out and stuff like that, people obviously get a chance to experience a lot of them again. See how that goes. Maybe that'll resurface the talks, and if people talk loud enough, in general, we'll do what the community wants. Like we're a community-driven game. If people want something, we'll make sure it happens. It's just that there's a lot of things that people want, so we're just trying to balance like what people want over each other.
Definitely understand that. I think that I don't envy the position, but it's an exciting one to be in, I guess, right? I think that I was nice to hear that in the League Six announcement that there are some plans maybe to carry over this trend. I was always loved the idea, and I'm sure maybe you can agree with me considering you're a big PoE fan. Of carrying forward seasonal mechanics when they work well, and then building on the season to make it more exciting. That to me is a wonderful idea. So I'm really am very excited to see what is done with this format. I guess new loot, whatever it may be, is just such an exciting prospect to me. Um, are you like, I know you don't have a big hand in the next league, but if there was any kind of like league specific mechanic that you're interested in seeing, what would that be? Like, is there something that you really just want to touch on that you haven't been able to yet?
What do you mean by mechanic? Because that can go from small to very, very large.
Well, I guess maybe I phrased that really poorly. Is there anything from leagues that you, and this is an edgy topic maybe, that you would like to see in the main game for whatever reason?
Oh, okay. I do really like Sunlight Spear. I think Sunlight Spear was just like an incredibly fun item to use. I think players generally agree. So figuring out if we could bring some sort of that concept into the main game and figure out how to balance that would be really cool. We've had quite a lot of cool relics that you could probably steal ideas from. Like we obviously Voldemort thieving kind of stole parts of Trickster's relic, like the auto pickpocketing. Like we've had inspirations there.
For sure. And it's cool. It's cool to have that as a testing ground. And not to cut you off, but I saw a short the other day of all the creators visiting the Jagex HQ. And they were asked their hottest RuneScape take. And I was surprised how many creators and developers alike answered removing run energy. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I completely get the desire for it. Like, it doesn't really add much meaningful gameplay. Like every now and again, there'll be a certain piece of content and a certain setup where it's like, yeah, you kind of want to manage your run. You want to turn it off a little bit. You want to walk when you can to manage it. Otherwise, you're going to need more staminas. And like that can genuinely add some like interesting gameplay. But there's obviously so many downsides of that where it just generally is a bit of a drag. It just makes you go slower throughout the game, etc. You can argue the whole like pure game design point of view of like, well, running doesn't like feel as good if you never walk, etc. And like it would remove reward space, and it feels good having staminas because walking is a thing, and like there's a bunch of things like that. I don't think we've pushed it a lot in old school RuneScape, like the benefits of like having walk effectively that much. So I don't think it would probably be a net negative to remove it, if I'm honest. I think the worst thing about removing it would probably kind of ruining a bit of agility's purpose, like
Yeah.
reason to level it. Like it's already really weak, so making it even weaker feels really bad. Obviously, we can just add more shortcuts, and I'm sure we will continue to add more and more shortcuts, which does help that a little bit. But the entire skill basically just being it unlocks shortcuts feels quite one dimensional. So
Yeah. No, I
I mean,
completely
I'm
agree
not the
with
guy
that.
who's making this decision, but I think if I was going to try and convince people internally and like really get that ball rolling, I think the thing I'd want to figure out is how do we make agility not feel one dimensional and just feel like we're just taking away an aspect of the game. Because at the end of the day, run energy isn't really much of a problem past like the 50, 100 hour mark. You got 60 agility, maybe you've got graceful, maybe you can get a couple of energy pots, you got some good teleports. Like at that point, it's not really much of an issue. But the early game is absolutely miserable. But we can fix that in a lot of other ways as well. If that is the primary issue people have with it, I think it is, we can fix that in loads of ways. We can supplement and support that. Like something small I really want to do is every time you complete a quest, it just refills all your stats. Like it gives
Mm,
you like all your run energy back, all your hit points and stuff like that. And we can maybe think of a thematic way to fit that in. But I feel like that would feel really good. An early game that'd be like really big for like routing and things like that. That'd be really nice. Obviously, people have talked about like hubs to restore your energy. I quite like the idea of like fire making, having a tie-in for run energy. Like you could sit by fires and get your energy back really quickly. Like I think there's a lot of things we can do that supplement like early gameplay loop.
I
Um,
definitely agree with you. I'm almost like surprised that there wasn't like in the agility we work essential, or not the agility, the run energy like changes that were done. I'm really surprised that there wasn't a greater incentive or emphasis put on agility there. And I know we're kind of not even talking about like PVM here, but like I was expecting that. Like, if anything were to change, I would always prefer like more reason to train a skill, not less. And it feels like agility has fallen even further by the wayside, really, after the changes to run energy. So I was wondering, has there been any rumblings about just making run energy scale more with your agility level, like have it be a bigger thing that happens rather than a smaller one? Like, by, I feel like at 99 agility you should just have permanent run energy. That would be like an example of like how extreme you could take it, but like that would be kind of like the, oh yeah, you did 400 hours of rooftops, you kind of deserve something for that, you know?
Yeah, I think depending on who you talk to, like 99 burn energy now with the latest changes basically is
It
limited.
kind of feels like that. Yeah, that's
You
a good
don't
point.
really
Yeah.
need staminas anywhere anymore. Like unless you're running around with like 64 kg and just never stopping, like you basically don't need burn. You don't really need pots and stuff anymore. Like it is genuinely fine at a very high level. The problem is just like granularity, right? Like if you want that progression, like we've raised the minimum run energy because it is just appalling early on, but then it effectively is almost infinite high level already. So let's say we doubled that. There's just not that much space to like interpolate between that. It would effectively be infinite at like 80 then if we like increased it even higher and still like linearly uh, raised your like run energy consumption between it or lowered it.
No,
So I don't think there's really
that's a good point.
space. That's why we tried to alter the formula quite a lot, though. I think the initial proposal for an energy was like making it scale more with weight. So weight having a lot of gear was still really bad. But then what we could do then is make it so if you didn't have a lot of weight, we could have really generous run energy restoration, and that basically gave us an extra balancing lever. But when we proposed that and put the beta up, there was quite a lot of instances where people kind of just felt worse off than they did before, and that's kind of how it just had to be to for the numbers to really play out. And obviously, players weren't happy with that, so we scrapped it. It'll
Interesting.
now just be an objective buff now, which again means we don't have as many levers to push, which means we can't really have that space to grow. But yeah, if people generally hate it like end game, like maybe we do just get rid of it one day. But yeah, I worry more about agility of the skill than I do run energy in that situation.
I do as well. That's always been my go-to. It's like I don't want I like yeah, agility kind of sucks. Like yeah, a lot of people hate it, but it doesn't mean you make it less relevant. That'd be like the opposite of what you want to do, I
We
feel.
can
So
make agility
yeah,
fun though. I feel like that's
yeah.
easier than like fixing the reward space. Like giving agility a purpose is a lot harder than just like making agility fun. Like Sepulcher, absolutely fantastic content, but it's only fantastic 92 onwards. Before that, it's kind of whatever. So I would rather just try and make like the 60 to 92 grind more fun in reality. And we've already proven that's possible.
I always like, and not to push back against you here, but I always feel like it needs to be both in my eyes anyway. Like I think a grind needs to not just
Ideally,
have
for
a fun,
sure.
yeah, but it needs to have a good output because after 400 hours of anything, the fun does end up fading at some point. And you do want some like external motivation for continuing it, right? There Sepulcher is an incredible piece of content that I think is undertuned for where it should be. Like it's super hard for skilling content,
Yeah.
and it gives like barely more experience than rooftops. Mod Rice and I talked about this a bit, and he was like, "Listen, I want to change it. It should be changed, but right now agility just doesn't have enough room for granular changes like these because everything's so tightly compacted for agility.
I
So
mean, that's
it
the
needs,
entire game in reality, right?
yeah, and we will touch on that. But before we touch on that, I think that we should revisit the topic of randomness for a moment because I feel like we moved past that with Inferno and the Colosseum, but I know you wanted to touch on that just with content in general. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the short and easy answer is just there's some randomness that's good and there's some randomness is bad. And an example that I've often gravitated towards is I think the randomness. So let's say P2 Verzik, where you're playing range or mage, you're running in and out, and every now and again some Nalika spawn, right? That's effectively the entire phase.
Yeah,
And it would be bad RNG if you had no idea when she was going to spawn Nalakis, right? If she could spawn them back to back, if she could go like 50 attacks without spawning them, like it's always within a fairly controlled window. You generally know when they're coming. and I think that's good. Like that's not very RNG. However, where they spawn and who they target is RNG, and that's very RNG. Like there's some. I think in a solo, like you're pretty much guaranteed like 1 or 2 spawns or something. But like in like a 4 or 5 man, like there's so many different spawns and they can target different players, which makes the variety of that special attack super high. Like you have to like tackle it like case by case every single time. And I think that's really good. And that's like really good variety. That's really good RNG. But again, if you had no idea when that special attack was happening, I think that would be frustrating more than anything. And I think every encounter just needs to kind of take that in mind. Like it's like you want a bit of randomness for like variety and to spice it up and make sure the player's feeling engaged. But you don't want too much RNG to like overly engage them or under engage them or frustrate them. It's very easy for RNG to get in that camp. And ironically, you kind of see that with drop tables a lot, right? Like most old school RuneScape drop tables are pure RNG. Like there's no like controlled aspects to it, and you definitely see the frustrations of that. Thankfully, players don't get too annoyed when they get lucky with drop tables, but they definitely get annoyed when they get unlucky.
Certainly. It's interesting to me that you bring that up because I think something I was very privy to very early on in my gameplay. Now I have a different perspective on it. Is I watched your interview that released like a couple of years ago. It was like or it's 2024, I think it was when you did like the interview for the what became the OSRS podcast.
Oh yeah.
And I know I saw some people being critical of you there because of the Fasani's drop table. So I would love for you to touch on that for a moment and just kind of like, what are your general thoughts on that? Because I know generally speaking, you like something when it's rare. Like I think there's a value to rarity. But obviously there's a balance there between what commons drop, how valuable should commons even be, how do you balance them, and how valuable should rares be? So has your perspective on that changed? Are you still firm in that belief? Like what I would love to hear the modern 2026 Arcane touch on that for a moment.
So first of all, like everyone gives me shit for Nightmare, but like I didn't develop Nightmare. I created Fosani's Nightmare, but that inherited a lot of problems from regular Nightmare, right? The drop table was already set. I couldn't just create Fosani's Nightmare and like 10x the drop rates. That would be incredibly insulting by the existing player base. Like people have grinded
Certainly.
that. So I tried to like make it more generous, like where I thought appropriate. And we've seen like over the years, it's effectively got buffed like 3 times now. And it's still like dramatically too slow rather than it should be. But yeah, like it feels like a funny meme at this point where I just see people complaining about Arcane having creating Nightmare's drop table, and I kind of just inherited it really. But yeah, that aside, I think I want to say that I've like changed my philosophy, but I don't think I really have in the sense that like I think it's important to have rare drops, and I think players agree. Like it wouldn't be that fun if you got like a rare drop every kill, right? Like just to be exaggeratory for the sake
Of
of it.
course.
Like if you got a rare drop every kill, they wouldn't really be rare. They wouldn't really be worth a lot of money. It'd feel really underwhelming. If they're too rare, it's also like, okay, I've spent like 30 hours of this piece of content. I got absolutely nothing. I'm frustrated. I'm bored. The game's not respecting my time. There's obviously a sweet spot in the middle, right? And we're always just arguing what the sweet spot is
Exactly.
fundamentally. And the sweet spot changes per boss. It changes per reward. It changes per like the entire drop table and the systems that are preventing it. Like, is it a group boss? Is it a solo boss? Is this like an end game reward? Is it mid game? How many items are on the drop table? Is the boss supposed to be good for like resources? Is this like a drop that like people like really need versus just kind of like a nice to have? Like there's so much context and perspectives that go into making a drop table that often you kind of just fuck up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think virtually every drop table that's been released, well, I want to say virtually every drop table that's been released has probably had a problem with it. Like there's been very few drop tables that have ever been released by anyone that have been like a slam dunk, like everyone's happy, move on. And usually the ones that are sometimes have a deeper problem that we end up fixing like 3 or 4 years later, like TOA or Zora or whatever else, right? Like players were fine with Zora on release, but it was kind of breaking the entire game, so it got nerfed like 3 times.
Right.
So historically, we've not done a very good job on it, and we're trying to get better. But I think that's just kind of proof of how difficult it is. It's a very complex and ever-changing problem as well. I feel like a perfect drop table 3 years ago looks very different to a perfect drop table like today as well. Just because like the community's changed, sentiments changed, the equipment landscape's changed. There's just so much that goes into it, and I don't want it to sound like I'm whinging or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's my job, and I need to do better. But in general, when a drop table is done badly, it's because there's like 10 perspectives that we need to like have, like 10 different eyes that we have on a drop table, and we're trying to make all of them happy. Like we're trying to make every perspective, every different type of player, the economy, everything. We're trying to make them all good, and often there are some perspectives to drop tables, there are some optics, there are some lenses that conflict with each other. So you end up having to sacrifice one of them. Like an example of that is like maybe so Nex is a really good one where like
Yeah.
I think the time to kill the time to complete Nex is like way too high. It's way too high for the context of the boss because the boss just isn't that fun. Like it's not that good. But it's also like best in slot melee armor at the time. And at the time, it felt like it would be insulting for it to be more common than Bandos, for example. I'm not saying it was anywhere close to that, right? Like it definitely could have been lower and probably not crouched on it. But theoretically, if it was a quicker time to complete than Bandos, that probably would have felt wrong. Um, so like if we wanted to make both of those happy, like maybe that's just not possible. And then when you come into the economy and you're like, okay, well we want like Torva to be like 200 or 300 mil a piece or something like that, because Bandos is like 50 mil a piece. Like that's kind of the goal there. We don't have a lot of control over these things. So yeah, we try and do our best. We try and have a lot of perspectives. We try and make sure like the regular drops don't feel too bad and like you feel like you're getting something every now and again. Like a Raxor, a Muspra, and TOA did quite a lot with that, with just trying to make the regular drops feel a little bit more exciting. Like you get a frozen cache, you get some new resource or something that's quite desirable for some niche use case. Things like that help. We try and make it so every now and again you just get a big regular drop, like the DT2 bosses put a lot of effort into that, where like you get a big bolt drop of Onyx bolts every now and again. Like stuff like that helps to make it so you don't feel like you've just spent 5 hours at a boss and it got absolutely nothing. And that gives us a little bit of leeway sometimes to make the drop rate a little bit rarer because we think that the economy can't support them coming into the game any quicker. But unfortunately, predicting economies is virtually impossible. So we're always just kind of making our best guess at all of this.
No,
Usually
that
just comparing to prior updates.
that makes sense. And I do want to say too that like I think by and large, I think the team has done well with how complicated the all these interweaving factors are to consider. Like it's really easy to lose track of one or multiple of them at any given point. And I think that you know, barring some outliers, I think especially with the newer bosses, you guys have hit a really good like in between for like be solid, right stuff. Like a great example being like Yama to me is in a good place now. Like I think he did deserve the drop rate nerf, quite frankly. I do think he deserved that. But I think where he's at today is good. That's a good place. It's hard to call him an end game because of the weird. We'll touch on that, but it's for a place where he's at. I think like a 60 to 80 hour grind on average is a solid place to be. I went way over. I went 1.3k KC without a single Oathblade piece. And that's where the Oathblade shards came in really clutch there. That's another intelligent choice where I don't like the idea of having like bad luck mitigation outright, where like, oh, I hit the KC, I get the Calphite head, but I do like the idea of having systems like the Oathblade shards that might have multiple uses or have like just a way to mitigate potential dry streaks. I like that idea. So I think you guys have done
Definitely
well
like
there.
the best iteration we've had, right?
Yeah.
We've tried a couple of different things, like the vestiges didn't really land very well, but this seems to be the best of both worlds for the most part. But we kind of got the math a little bit wrong, and yeah, it was just probably a little bit too generous for like how good it was, and see it was creeping on Torva and things like that.
Yeah,
I do think
yeah.
I do think most of like drop tables is just optics, if I'm honest. Like I do think like drop rates and people math it out and you can say that it's like wrong. And usually if we're wrong by like a very significant degree, we will change it. Especially if it's like quick. Harder to change it when it's been established in the game for a while. But I know like I think mastering mixology, like we had like drop rates we agreed were appropriate internally, but I think we were just like misaligned with the community in that one where we thought the rewards are really good and desirable, and it would be appropriate to spend like 30 hours grinding. Players really did not think so. It was off by like a factor or two.
Yeah.
And we dramatically changed those drop rates, I think.
And you guys have been always historically agile with that stuff too. And I think a lot of people, I always criticize sometimes some
Maybe
of
not as
the,
much as we should. I
well,
feel like some stuff probably hangs around for longer than it should, but yeah,
some stuff,
we try.
certainly. But like when it comes to new modern content that releases and there's an issue with it, I can't name like a single time where that hasn't been at least touched up a little bit. In a relatively fast pace. Obviously, there's grandfathered content, that's older stuff for sure. But like I think sometimes I'm critical of the more reactionary response the community can have sometimes, because it's like it's clear to me that it's coming from people that mean the best and are very passionate about the game, but also from people that generally only play old school RuneScape. So they can't like they don't have the perspective of like every other MMO and how slow and lumbering like a lot of other bigger MMOs are, bigger in regard to how many developers they have. So it's like not to say you shouldn't be critical and you should push for changes, 100% support that, but also like the perspective of like, man, you guys are so lucky, like coming from the WoW scene where it took content dies before it can even live sometimes. Like it is crazy sometimes. And uh so it was a night and day difference between like, oh, Master Mixology isn't well tuned, 4 days later it's fine now, right? Like, oh, Yama drop rates are a bit too common, 3 days later it's fine now. Like that to me is even the sailing changes, like that to me, as critical of them as I am now, good. When it comes to when it comes to bosses and boss design, you brought up Nex. You have you which you I'm not sure what role you played in the design of Nex, but Nex came out a bit before I started playing, and it's a very, not to yap too long here, but it's a very a confusing encounter in some ways, where generally speaking I can always place encounters in generational pockets. Like if I play the game for 2 months, let's say, I can look at God Wars 1, I can look at KQ, I can tell when those came out, not just aesthetically but like mechanically. I can look at Zulrah and be like, okay, like I can tell when that came out. And with TOA and stuff, especially with some of the newer encounters, it's very clear that this is like a whole new branch. With Nex, it came out a couple years ago, but similarly, I know it's a recreation of an RS2 boss, but you could have told me that came out in like 2010, 2007, whatever, and I'd probably believe you. Like it feels very like antiquated in some ways.
Mhm.
And I know there were some issues with planning loot tables. I know it's technically an anniversary boss. Can you just like walk me through it? Because as someone who's just recently learned it, I would love to hear your perspective on Nex, some considerations you have for it as someone who actually played a role in creating it.
Yeah, so Nex was kind of given to me with I was only like 2 years into the company, I think, at that point. But it had a very clear objective of like we want to like preserve the nostalgia of the fight. Like we have quite a lot of players that obviously played RuneScape before Old School really came out and played a lot of Nex. And yeah, the goal was to kind of like preserve a lot of that, while still giving it a bit of a pass, trying to modernize it a little bit and remove any too rough edges and stuff. I think it did a good job on that, and I have talked to quite a lot of players that do really enjoy Nex, saying that it is like really reminiscent and it is kind of like how they remember and they're loving it and they appreciate all the like small bits of tech that I put in to help you like optimize the fight, and I do think a lot of it's there and like it works. I just think we probably only really pleased like the people that A played Next back then a lot and B are like fairly hardcore now. And I think that's like a niche within a niche. And I don't think like in my opinion, retrospectively, I don't think that was the right decision. Like in terms of like what the goals were of that project. I think we could have taken Nex in name and concept and maybe and the thematic and just kind of done an entire boss from that. That would have been more expensive and budgets or whatever fucking boring numbers aside. I think that would have created an update that more people probably would have resonated with. Um, yeah.
I'm I appreciate that and it's funny because I it's interesting to hear like the like the top down, like this is what we want the boss to be, design around that. That's always interesting to hear too, but like it feels to me that you had kind of like a second go at it with Araxor. I'm not sure what the top down request there was, but that's obviously an RS3 encounter. And while the encounters inhabit two entirely different spaces, like in RS3 it launched as like a super mega end game boss. While here it's more of like a Slayer boss, so it has to be more chill, has to be more like palatable or whatever. But you know transform the fight while keeping some elements of its identity, the mirror back spiders, all that kind of stuff. And I think you did an incredible job. I'm a Araxor is my favorite Slayer boss. Maybe not the hardest competition, but
Oh,
it's an awesome fight. Like on its face, it's a really great fight. I
like
love fights.
Kraken? What the hell, man?
Yeah, I know, right? My one of my buddies is gonna hate me for saying that. And I think that when it comes to like boss interaction, I just love so much of Iraq. I love fights where you can like hurt the boss with their own mechanics. I love the way you guys handled in my upcoming video, which might be out by the time I already mentioned. I talk about dealing with emergent mechanics, how Blizzard deals with them as opposed to how Jagex deals with them. And I love the way you guys handled the step under self-inflicted leg wound
Yeah.
mechanic. Instead of just removing it, you just nerfed it a little bit, balanced it a bit, but kept that tech in. That's the kind of stuff that really speaks to the consideration for depth and emergent behavior from players and rewarding that behavior and ingenuity. And I agree with you generally that Nex probably top down should have been like its own thing, especially because Fasani and Nightmare in general is kind of like Nex in many ways. I think a lot of people draw that comparison of like, yeah, Fasani and Nightmare are very similar to Nex when it comes to the pillar mechanics for different areas. You focus all of them individually, come back to the boss. There's even the ground puddles that look very similar, that you dodge like you do in
Yeah.
P2 Nex. And now that I've learned Nex at least a little bit in small teams, I'm no Nex pro. Don't look at my KC. I did get spooned a Xerath Van Braces at 3 KC, so I can't hate it too much. But it is definitely. I very I wish to see. I wish Nex got kind of like the Echo KQ treatment, where where it's kind of like you keep the coolest thing about Echo KQ, and I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, and I'm sorry for yapping a lot, but like it's the fact that the way you handle KQ is doing the step under for KQ, not just when it comes to the way you like break the boss and like can flinch it, but like generally the way I did my 100 odd KC for the head. I was doing step unders to get it off tick with my Eye of Iac, all that kind of stuff. Really cool. And the fact that the Echo version inhabited that same ethos with its own step under is such a genius interpretation of the fight while still making it like an actual boss. I was like in awe at how creative that small decision was. And I would have loved to see
Mod Halo for that.
Yeah, I mean, shout out.
KQ.
I didn't know that, and yeah, shout out to Mod Halo. You absolutely created one of my, unironically, one of my favorite encounters in the game. So like, I'm sad that it's only in the in the leagues. With Nex, do you see future changes? I know that there's no chance of going back and just fully reworking a boss that requires so much dev time, so much budget, so much player call, willingness to it, and that's impossible to get on a fight that I feel, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, isn't done that much by players anyway. So you're not going to get a huge swath of players go rework Nex because most people aren't even doing it. So it's kind of like this weird limbo to me. And I know that some people do like it, but I know there's been changes. Do you see like any future iteration on the fight at all?
Man, you just said like 10 things I wanted to
I'm
answer.
so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I went through like ADHD brain. Okay, my watchers are familiar with it. Do you see Nex getting future iterations? If so, what do those look like to you?
I think it'd be very plausible to see a world where we do like a hard mode Nex and like see what that looks like, and that could be a very different fight at the end of the day. In terms of like changing the existing one, obviously we have made changes to it over time just to like iron out the kinks, so to speak. And I do think it's a much better fight now. It's a lot more engaging to reduce the amount of damage you can take and stuff. But in terms of like mass reworking it, I would never say anything's off the cards, right? Like if enough players wanted to do something, we would fucking rework anything, I think, in reality. If there's enough demand behind it. I don't think budgets would really matter. It's just about demand, and if we think it's the best thing for us to work on right now, right?
Yeah.
That's usually based on just player opinion at the time. But yeah, you are right. I can't imagine like an uprising of players like really demanding for Nex to be reworked. And it would also be hard for us to rework it in a way that wouldn't upset the people that have known it and learned it and enjoy like the current tech. Like you'd have to try and rework it in a way that still preserves a lot of stuff, which is quite constricting and makes it quite a lot harder.
You heard it here first, folks. It's Fasani's Nex coming in the theater near you at some point next year.
It's such a pet peeve when people say like Fosani's like X or whatever,
Yeah.
like just put Fosani's in front of everything. Like Fosani's is like a thematic, like
Yeah,
there's
it's a character. It's a literal character.
But people
Yeah.
just put the word like it's like challenge mode. And I'm like, doesn't make any sense.
I think creating some kind of challenge mode version that does give it the Fasani's treatment, where with more careful consideration you can avoid more of the damage.
Yeah.
It would be cool. Maybe like I think the main issue I always have with Nex is that it just feels like you're just getting like pummeled through like from like 9 different directions. Like she's draining your stats, she's hitting you through prayer, she's hitting you when you're off prayer.
Super oppressive.
Yeah, it's like such an oppressive encounter there. Where and the real like wrapper on top of Nex is, to me, the biggest flaw with Nex isn't even in the fight. Although I'm not a giant fan of the fight. It's the fact that the way to even engage in it requires like layers of frustration, right? Like you need to go get KC at Gowers 1, which to me is a truly antiquated system, more so than run energy, that you can remove that and absolutely zero, which the content would just become better as far as I'm concerned. And to me, like maybe not outright, maybe there's some botting concerns there, but like if you have elite CAs done, I feel like you can just skip. I know they have economical keys. That's the economy consideration now, but like to me, it's like such a punishing way to learn a fight where you have to get 150 KC because you don't want your group to wait, every attempt or every 2 kills. And simultaneously, if you die, you lose all of that KC. So now you are making them wait, even though they're taking the time out of their day to even teach you, which puts so much like frustration on the new player of like, I can't fuck up, I can't mess up. I just, man, that like bridged before you even get to Nex is the part where I feel like so much of the adjustment can occur. Do you agree or kind of disagree with that?
I agree the old school has a fundamental problem where learning difficult content is kind of just miserable. And I don't think there's, in general, I don't think there's many solutions to it. Like you can see it with Yama, where I kind of just sneakily just put your gravestone like outside of Yama's lair, right?
Goat,
And
honestly.
that already just makes like a just gigantic difference in just making that fight less frustrating to learn. Like there's things like that we can do. We can make it so your gear stays equipped after you die, maybe, and like you don't have to redo your inventory every single time, especially if you've got a full inventory supply still. Like I think there's a lot we can do to make it better. But on like Next specifically as the example, and there's other things that fall under this as well. I think the KC system adds something good. I think there's something there that's interesting. I think it opens up a lot of gameplay opportunities, like combat achievements, like ecumenical keys, like the fact that there's like strategies towards like which ones you kill and like optimize your KC and stuff. The fact that you can stay there for long amounts of times, like if you get a bunch, you can like stay for ages, and you get KC in the fight as well. And once you start getting really good, like you can kind of snowball and just stay there forever. Like you never need to get KC again. Like I think there's so much value in that system, but you're completely right. It makes learning experience absolutely miserable. And I don't know how you fix that without just breaking the other.
That's a great question. And I was thinking of ways too, where I'm like, I've taken a page out of the Mod Rice philosophy, where I'm like, and I believe you said this too, by the way. I don't want to get to me when I talk to you in private, not about this specifically, but about other stuff, where don't do the sweeping change. Try do incremental change before resort. Yeah, I believe you also said the same exact thing. So a page from the Mod Arcane book as well, where I was thinking of ways like, okay, well, if I was an OSRS dev and I wasn't just going to sit here and be like, remove it. How would we implement it in maybe in a more palatable way? Maybe it's, and as you pointed out in your response too, maybe if you just get a KC and Nex in like a small group rather than in a mass, you're just guaranteed to be able to enter again. So you're only like really punished for dying, rather than punished for not getting enough KC while there. Because in like a 3 or 4 man, in 5 man, you're getting 2 to 3 KC before you're tellying out, because you're maybe one of your members got totally blasted and he's out of brews, and we didn't get enough supply drops, so it's just like shit. It could be stuff like that. It could be ways of like extending a trip within Nex itself. Like I like the altar system that all the God Wars 1 bosses have. Maybe there's, and you kind of implemented a different way, which is like the Blood Reaver mechanic, which I think is kind of interesting. So like things like that to me, not even subtle tech, but overt tech to stay in the fight longer, to not need to spend their KC, or have an easier time of getting enough KC in the fight to be able to re-enter it without like going out and re-gearing just to go kill some people with your blowpipe, like stuff like that to me. I don't know if that there's touch-ups there that are a possibility. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's loads of small changes that we could do. Whether they like fundamentally fix the problem or like make enough of a difference or really like fix the issue for most players is a separate question, right? But
Yeah.
there's always loads of small things we can do and just iron out the edges. Like I really want to do what Next does with KC. It's like all the God Wars bosses. Like if you kill an orc, you get more Bandos KC versus killing a goblin.
I agree with
I would
that.
love to like have a pass on all of that. The fact that you're supposed to like kill imps and hop worlds for a Zamorak is just stupid.
Yeah.
Like we should never really be encouraging world hopping. No one enjoys that. But yeah, there's things like that we can do to just make it nicer. Also, like I think at Next, like if you equip more Zaros pieces, you get more KC.
Yeah.
Which can speed it up massively as well. Again, if we could roll that out wider, it could be more generous. It could be more systems that like give you more KC. Like there's so many things we could do.
Have you guys ever considered just keeping KC when you teleport out?
At that point, you might as well just keep KC all the time, right? Because like otherwise, all you're really doing is punishing death and leaving manually, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess to clarify, I meant just in general, just retaining KC. So if someone could plan ahead, go, I'm going to get 200 next KC for tomorrow, and then log off, and then I'm ready to go. Like stuff like that. Like, has that ever been a consideration, or is that like, do you feel like taking too much away from it?
I've never heard it be like actively talked about. Just musing with the idea right now. I think that would work if you didn't get KC off the bosses themselves. Like I feel like then it's almost like a builder and spender kind of loop where you like build up a bunch of KC and then you spend it like you're getting inside, and obviously the more kills you can get in the trip the better. Then if you re-enter, obviously your KC is going down. But maybe it's fine as long as like the amount of KC that you would gain from the boss is always going to be less than the amount that it costs to go in. So it's like you want to encourage long trips. Maybe it would be fine. No.
Yeah. It's interesting because the last thing I want to touch on next, because I think we went through all of my reactionary a couple dozen KC in, and I'm pulling my hair out. The drops on Nex are very interesting to me too. Specifically, I'm generally okay with Torva. Now that Oathblade exists, you can kind of just skip Torva, as sad as that is to say, at least for the time being. But the ZCB to me is like mega rare quality item from this boss. It is just insane to the point where like it seems like every single master and grandmaster speed task is tuned around having one. Yeah. It is just such an unbelievably powerful spec weapon, the most powerful, I would say, in the game. What are your thoughts on the ZCB? Because to me, like, the ZCB is emphasizing the elements of ranged that are cool, like identity-wise, but they're also kind of like impossible to balance. I don't know how you would possibly balance the ZCB with Ruby Bolts. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that a little bit. Maybe you can talk me down from this edge.
I don't think it was particularly much deeper than like we knew we wanted to release a new crossbow. I think players were asking a lot for a new crossbow at the time.
Yeah,
we explored what a new crossbow could look like. I think we might have either polled or blogged or maybe just talked to some players about a couple of different options at the time, and this was kind of the one we just kind of landed on. In hindsight, is it a problem? I think it's generally fine. I don't like Ruby Bolt resetting bosses. I don't think players do either. I don't like it when we have encounters that kind of promote that, and obviously combat achievements that promote that. And we've been trying to figure out solutions to that over the past like year or two. But I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with ZCB just being this like giga opener. I think it's quite cool, and I don't think it's like a massive outlier, to be honest.
Mhm. I, I I see where you're coming from. You know, at the end of the day, it's a really big like chase item, right? And it definitely is satisfying to obtain. Hopefully, I will say, do you feel like Ruby bolts in general are a bit of a restricting design,
Oh yeah, they're a fucking
space?
nightmare.
Yeah, and I feel like
Uh,
designing more items around them would eventually, if we ever get to a point where Ruby bolts need to be reworked, in some way, you're gonna have to go back and change all of these crossbows that rely on Ruby bolts to be
just alt
balanced.
effects in general are
Yeah.
just kind of a mess in reality, and I think they got introduced in old school, like during old school's lifespan, or reworked during old school's lifespan or something. I can't remember what they were like when it launched or anything, whether they existed or not. I think they were introduced later on or reworked later on. And yeah, they were clearly built in a way that didn't really consider how they would fit into like the combat landscape and promote like diversity or anything like that. It was like 90% of them are useless. Two of them are good, and the two of them that are good basically just ignore defense, which is basically our only balancing lever in the entire game. Just
Yeah.
is an absolute nightmare. But we've worked around it. They're cool in their own right, but yeah, they are very restrictive. But so is most of old school's reward design, to be honest.
And we will touch on that because that's I love your initial conversation with the OSRS podcast is actually what spurred my eventual endless consideration about reward space in OSRS. So thank you for that. But before we do touch on that, um, I feel like bolt procs. I think part of the issue is that they're obviously so powerful. The good ones are they're so powerful, but they're also so random. Where you can just get 5 ruby bolts on a Zebak, you know, or in an Ohm, and you're just kind of cooking. And it does feel good, but I feel like that's why they need to be so powerful because they're so random. I wonder if maybe this is not a fun solution or answer to this, but like if we were to make them more consistent, I say we as if I'm part of the development team. If you guys were to make them more consistent, and remove some of that power, maybe that would remove some of the fun for some people. It's like, oh my god, I got all these ruby procs. But on the other hand, it'd be a lot easier to tune crossbows around them. Has that been ever a consideration of like, okay, what if they just proc every third hit against a target? Like, not a super fun idea, but you know what I mean.
I do. I think you would lose more than you'd gain by doing that. It would be easier to do some things with it, and maybe some of them could be made consistent. But it feels kind of like its identity that
Yeah,
enchanted bolts are
it's
a
like
bit
super random.
random, and you can't rely on them. But yeah, they're still really powerful in their own right, and averages still average out, right?
And you guys managed to do some really cool stuff. I'm not. Was it you who designed Phantom Muspa, by the way?
Yeah, that was one of my
Yeah,
bosses.
I do really love Muspa, and I loved grinding Muspa. And I don't know if this was your consideration when you were designing it. Maybe it was, but the enchanted sapphire bolt procs on the
Yeah.
prayer face was just such a novel. It's stuff like that to me that makes me love OSRS PvM, honestly, more so than even some of the really fun like tech that you can do when it comes to just like
I
movement
think
and
the
stuff.
the prayer shield was
Mhm.
actually Husky's idea. Like I was getting some feedback, and I just wanted a bit more of a spicy finale for the fight. They came up with just the idea of like, oh, what about if I had like a prayer shield? And I was like, hell does that mean? And then let's like explore that and figure out like how prayer points in an NPC would work, and then painstakingly plug it into every random prayer thing, like Andos Mace and Corruption from Arcane Spellbook and all the other random crap.
Yeah,
Fucking
I
Sapphire
will.
Balls.
I really loved that mechanic specifically. I mean, I like a lot of the must mechanics, but that mechanic
It is super
specifically
cool.
is just such a novel mechanic, and stuff like that to me really adds the RPG into RuneScape in some ways.
Yeah.
Like there are games that I think have amazing combat, like World of Warcraft, that sometimes feel like they're restricted through balancing to have to make the most like non RPG driven boss fights. They're all very like sweat mechanics driven, but they're not interacting with the actual RPG outside of that all too much. And when they are, that's usually a mistake that's removed from the game.
I mean, that's kind of how I feel about the KC and God Wars. Like, I feel like
Yeah,
that's kind of RPG, right? You're in this
it
God Wars
is.
dungeon. You're killing the little minions. You're getting the respect to open the door and fight the general. Like, I think that's cool, and it's kind of part of what makes old school a actual RPG.
And I totally recognize that. And simultaneously to everything, obviously there's a balance, right? You can say like, well, what if it's 1,000 KC to open the door, and then you're like, that's RPG, but it's, you know. So obviously there's a balance there, and it's subjective in regard to like, you know, where that balance is. But I totally agree with you in that like that does add a level of like maybe immersion, not the best word, but like engagement with the game outside of just PvM. Some of my favorite mechanics in the game are just from quest bosses. Like I always shout out Sirach in While Gothic Sleeps, like telegrabbing and then alking something in your inventory as a mechanic is so novel and
It's
so
so
cool.
cool.
It's just like the coolest thing ever. I also like shouting out the jugs on Zebak where you're rolling them and having to shoot them. Like stuff like that to me is so cool, and it makes every boss fight feel so unique. So the prayer mechanic smiting Muspa is just really cool in that regard. So props to that. I think that I really want to hone in on reward space. That's been the kind of the topic. You know, I promised my friend I'll talk about Nex, I'll talk about, you know, all X, Y, and Z. But the real thing is I want to talk about reward space. It's something that has been on my mind ever since I really reached into the end game. But I was thinking about it earlier.
Good boy.
Before I get into my old ramble about it, I would love to hear just like uh, what parts of OSRS reward space are difficult or having issues, and what parts do you think are great that it work perfectly or really well? Just so we can set the ground and the foundation for people listening.
I don't think it's arrogance because I'm not going to claim credit for nearly any of this. I think old school has one of the best progression systems in the entire game, and that's fundamentally based off rewards.
Mhm.
So I think it is just fantastic for the most part. There's obviously some things that are probably maybe not as strong as it should be, or anything like that, or maybe too long to get, and you can argue those nitpicks for ages. But overall, I think old school's progression systems are amazing, and the reward space is all really good and cool and varied and really good. And I think honestly, most of that's credits to the players in regard. Like they've kind of held us accountable. They've figured out like when we propose a reward that's probably too strong or inappropriate or coming from the wrong content or whatever. And that just helped to shape that game into that place. But in terms of what's like hard or which parts are like struggling, equally all of it.
Yeah.
Like coming up with new rewards is an absolute nightmare. Coming up with appropriate rewards and drop tables and drop rates is so awkward. But we get through it every time. It's always a process. It's honestly like every project that I've been on, the rewards are always the hardest part of it. Like making a good boss is really difficult. Making like a good reward set is so much more emotionally draining, but a million times over.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I will echo your initial claim too, where I said this way back in my first ever popular video. Is it is the best progression system of any MMO that I've personally ever played. It's not even close, especially in the early and mid game, where it's this cross pollination of all these different grinds and utility upgrades and quality of life and conveniences that all merge together to make other goals smoother, right? Like you're not just getting more powerful in a linear fashion, you're becoming more powerful transportationally, you're getting more powerful with your utilities that you have and what you're able to do with your how you're speeding up certain grinds, how you get into a boss becomes quicker. Like everything is so interconnected, cross pollinated in a captivating sense. The early and mid game of old school RuneScape is just it's like a Dark Souls 1 tier world design of reward progression. It's insane. I would say I'm a bit more critical of OSRS's progression toward the end game, late game, I guess maybe you could say, where it really narrows down to just very incremental power increases because you've gotten most of the utilities already, most of them anyway. And finding space for future utilities without power creeping the game is or power creeping elements of the game is very challenging too. Um, and that's kind of what I want to focus on too, while still, you know, giving flowers where they're at. When it comes to reward design, and again, before I even get to my app fast about it, uh, what is like an item that comes to mind right now that that was just giving you like an infinite amount of trouble designing and made you pull your hair out?
Yeah, let's have a look at some bosses. It's definitely going to be some of them. I think TOA in general was quite a challenge. I remember there's a lot of iterations of a lot of rewards on that. The armor set and Sori went through quite a few iterations. So the Shadow and the Hecker of Sumikum, Hecker had quite a few iterations. Every reward set's had a bunch of iterations. I remember the Muspa and the Venator bow, like people were just not convinced it would be good because people couldn't really see the use cases. And it didn't have loads of strong use cases at the time, but I'd like to think we've kind of proven out that use cases can exist and we've kind of created them. So
Yeah.
that's the whole chicken and egg situation that's often a problem with us.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's interesting because I wasn't around for Venator, and I would have likely been one of those people that goes, "It has no uses right now. This is annoying." And then I seeing like its use on Whisper was really really fun, and just general Slayer. It's a very convenient, cheaper alternative to bursting tasks and stuff. So very and more AFK. So very chill in that regard too. So I do love that reward space, and the fact that it can be integrated both in PVM and in more casual skilling. It's very it's a very cool space, and it's also just, I mean, I guess you can say there's two uniques off Muspa, but that's like the one core unique off Muspa. Have you found yourself leaning toward making bosses with less overall uniques? Araxor has two, Muspa has one technically. Like, how do you feel about that?
yeah, so firmly in the camp that I think old school drop tables and bosses and content and progression all be so much better if bosses just dropped less unique.
Yeah,
Uh, the items can realize more of their GP per hour when there's less uniques on a drop table because if if Leviathan only dropped versus top, for example, and nothing else, the entire like the reason, how do you phrase it? Like the amount of versus tops that come in the game is purely dictated by the price of versus top,
yeah,
fundamentally, right? Like obviously you can talk about requirements and a bunch of other like obtuse stuff, but like fundamentally right now, the price of versus is dictated by Venator Vestige reality, and maybe the pet, maybe the sorry Brax part. Like, the fact that there's so many different uniques means that the price of every individual item kind of just gets like diluted and hurt, which means that items can't realize their true value. So like GP per hour wise, every boss is kind of hurt by having multiple uniques on them. However, if you only had like one unique on a boss, it raises the question of like, what's the drop rate then, right? Like if we just had Leviathan and all it dropped was a Venator Vestige and nothing else, the drop table would be a lot more boring, right? Like you'd only get a unique after like 80 hours or whatever, versus like getting a unique every like 15 hours, right? However, I generally think there's a world where if Leviathan only had Venator Vestige, you could justify making Venator Vestige like a 20-hour drop. Like you could absolutely nuke the drop rate, make it so much smaller. I think that'd be more fun, like as a player. Like all these grinds are so much more shorter and bitty, and that helps with the whole like all these upgrades are only like a small increment. That's okay if it's not a really long grind. So the GP per hour benefits from it in terms of like, yeah, the GP per hour doesn't get massively skewed. And the from like player sentiment enjoyment, I think actually benefits from it because we can actually make the uniques a lot more common if there's a lot less of them on the drop table. We can be a lot more generous with things like that.
I think, yeah,
And it also helps reward space in the long term because it's something I've been thinking of for a while. I can't remember if we've talked about this at all, but if you do some like really shitty napkin math and analyze like every update individually, 95% plus of updates that get added to old school RuneScape consume more reward space than they create. Like every boss is maybe introducing like 3-4 rewards that's consuming from the reward space, this finite, theoretical finite reward space, and is maybe creating potentially one, maybe half, maybe nothing. Like it's not actually promoted any new weapon, any new gameplay style, any new niche that could be abused by a new reward in the future. Most of them just don't, simply. It's really awkward in our game to do that. And we've been trying, and some bosses have been more successful than others on that. Even Leviathan's a good example. Like I think Webweaver Bow is really good at Leviathan because of its
yeah.
weird damage formula. Like some things like that do get boring, but I would say that's not even like half of a reward space in reality. It's like so minuscule. Tormented Demons did a good job, like really encouraging like slower weapons and things like that. But again, not really promoting that much rewards to the base. But yeah, if you take that napkin math and figure out like every update is consuming more reward space than it's actually promoting, eventually we're gonna run out. Is a reality. We're gonna run out of good reward space, and then we're gonna have to do effectively drastic things to create reward space. Things like
Yeah.
T-Bow and Scythe and Shadow, like they create reward space through power creep, right? The fact that Shadow exists means that Eye of Iak can exist. Eye of Iak probably couldn't have existed before Shadow. It would have been really weird that Doom gave a better mage weapon than a raid, right? Like that just feels weird. But now that Shadow exists, it all of a sudden like feels more acceptable. And reward spaces are just a bit weird and finicky like that. So I do firmly believe bosses would be better with less rewards. I don't know how receptive the wider player base would be on that. I think there's kind of an expectation that a boss has quite a few different things going on with it. And we don't necessarily have to go down to as extreme as just one reward, right? And that's kind of why things like Muspa and Araxor, and I think even Doom to an extent, like we're just having a few less rewards because we're trying to like pull back a little bit and see if that's okay. But yeah, that's like the theoreticals that I've been thinking of a lot.
Yeah. So reward space, what personally, I am always for 2 to 3 drops. To me, that just translates to a slightly maybe shorter grind, which some bosses like Nex, as you mentioned, a bit much in regard to how long it takes to complete for a fight like that. I think 2 to 3 bosses, even 2 to 3 uniques on Nex, like let's just say if we don't even have the Torva Nex, like it's just DCB, Hilt, and fuck, maybe one more thing, I don't know, create something, but Torva Helm for some reason, and that would be like, you know, a bit more palatable. It worked really well for Araxor as well, and that also translates to just more bosses. So I am so
It
like,
does, yeah.
I am just happy with that. I rather have the same like a set of 6 cool items be divvied up between 2 bosses than put it onto one. That always is my take, because that just creates less
Obviously,
burnout.
like dev resource and art resource and etc. is a separate conversation. Like we
Yeah,
can't actually split it into 2 bosses, but theoretically, yeah, I think over the course of your account, you would be killing more bosses in reality, right? Which I think is cool.
yeah,
I don't think we should really require players to kill 2,000 of the same boss. I'd rather them kill 1,000 of 2, right? And
yeah,
this kind of stuff snowballs as well, right? Because I don't know how much you've like looked into the math of like drop rates and stuff, but like the bigger the drop rate is, and the more variance there is, the more likely you are to go unlucky, right?
yeah.
So like smaller grinds theoretically should constrain that variance somewhat, which I think should be a perk.
For sure. And I will say, like, you know, I know it's kind of a taboo to go back and revisit drop rates, right? Like places like Chambers of Zarek, I know that has been done by removing some of the items that are totally insane on it, like the dragon sword. But but even there, like I think Chambers of Zarek is just flooded with rewards. I think you can even thematically move some of them, although that would create, like, okay, imagine creating a new boss and it has Chambers of Zarek rewards on it, and then you that might
I
be kind of
think
unsatisfying to players too. So
when Wild Gothic Sleeps was coming out, I think we actually polled or like surveyed players on like, do you want Dragon Claws to come from
yeah,
Tormented Demons? Because originally they did in like original RuneScape, and we were personally happy to pull that drop off of Chambers of Zarek and just put it somewhere else. But players seemed quite against it.
which to me honestly is a bit sad, because as much as I do like the Burning Claws, they have just cannibalized the Dragon Claws in like most situations. There's a couple places where Dragon Claws are marginally better, but it is not fun getting those anymore. I feel, and obviously they're expensive, so if you're a main, you can just sell them. But like as an iron anyway, I have them, and I'm like, bro, I use them on like 2 fights, and it doesn't even feel that good because it's a 50% spec energy as opposed to 30 on the Burning Claws. It's so much more easy to use the Burning Claws. Like even in like a TOB scenario, I'm always preferring to bring
Dragon Claws look
burners.
so cool though, man.
They do, and that's kind of the thing where I'm like, they look cool. I love the burn effect too. I just like that idea, and
Yeah,
it
I
does
like
you.
Burn.
There's a space for it in like longer encounters. That's where it has the value. I like that a lot. But to me, it's like, man, I just wish they would just put those there. That would have been like an easier way to do it. But I'm also just so wanting to see a bit of a trim on the Cox table. I really want to see a trim on the Nightmare table. If the next raid is somehow prioritizing any level of crush weakness, I'm hoping players are like, hey, hey, revisit this table. Hey, now that more than just like Iron Men and bots are doing Fasani, revisit this table, please. And I'm hoping there's enough of an outcry there for the to maybe touch that up a little bit, because Fasani and Nightmare, I should say, has more uniques than TOA. Like, what the fuck? Like, that's insane to me. That's actually insane to me.
Yep.
So an idea I had, again, not to be armchair game dev, and this does have issues. This, I don't know if I even told this to you yet, but this one does have economic issues. But it's just combining all the Nightmare orbs into a singular orb, and just having the ability to pick which one you get. This does homogenize prices and make issues there, but it also just fixes a lot of the problems. Maybe just removing the Nightmare stat from the table entirely and have it be a vendor item with no stats, and then it gets the stats when you put the orb in it. Like, things like that, I feel like would, if it's 4 uniques or 5, like Yama, that would be so much less obnoxious to consider I have to do, 550 hours of Nightmare, especially considering it's such a difficult fight by comparison to a lot of, other encounters. So like, I don't know if, again, not to be like, would you do this? Would you take my idea? Like, but has there been any conversations about stuff like that happening to fights that maybe haven't aged as well when it comes to reward space?
Yeah, I would love to just split up Nightmare's drop table, just like
Yeah.
bring the orbs somewhere else or bring the Inquisitors somewhere else and just like simplify that significantly. And yeah, you're effectively halving the amount of time you're going to be spending at that boss then just by doing that alone. You could then
Yeah.
that probably would open up more of a conversation of just redoing that drop table in general, and then maybe redoing Inquisitors. And like, obviously, there's talks about Inquisitors being like the odd one out these days. At the time, Inquisitors seemed like the best option because power creep was a lot more careful back then. But Oath play is kind of just people are fine with that, right? So like, Inquisitors could just be in the same vein. So it's like, I would love to do stuff like that. They're just really hard conversations to have, and I think the community and the team only have like so much energy to put into these things. And obviously the last like year, especially, it's like sailing has been like the focus, right? So
Yeah.
maybe this upcoming year, like as much as players have kind of criticized the roadmap a little bit, we have a lot of big projects, but it's like less smaller ones. Maybe that means there's like more time for us to have these conversations. Still going to be a sweep up this year that I'll be heading up. So,
oh man,
who knows?
Well, if you're working on the sweep up, if you guys just want to throw in a little sneaky Fasani vote, or Nightmare vote, I keep saying Fasani, that's the only one I do, but if you want to throw in a little sneaky one, and not to maybe increase the rates, I don't think that's even necessary. I think that the changes you guys made last sweep up, where you just removed one of the phases, is like, again, it's one of those like game design like aha moments where you're like, that's what the fight needed, it was too long.
It felt too long, man. It's
yes,
slightly too long, but
definitely. And it feels a lot better to do now that it doesn't feel as like arduous of a fight that's already insanely punishing. It feels just much easier to grind now. So if there's ever a chance of like shifting some of the rewards there, I know there's a lot of like economic concerns because the orbs are very expensive, even though they are functionally useless. So I'm just like sitting there like, I wish they weren't as expensive. So there was more incentive to move them around a little bit, because like the volatile orb is used in PvP sometimes. The harmonized orb is PvP sometimes, and the Eldritch orb is Inferno sometimes. And that's like that's kind of like it for how expensive those items are. So it's hard to like shift them around to potentially lose that value, because people are very precious about like, the value of their items decreasing. So it's a hard one to sell there. I wonder what if you could just like snap your fingers and do something. I know you mentioned like shifting them around a little bit. Do you envision them being on like a separate boss fight that you would create for that if you had the opportunity to do so?
I mean, there's a couple of different options that are maybe obvious. Like, what about if Fosani's had some of the drops and Nightmare had some of the drops, right? Like,
Yeah,
split it up like that. And you'd probably want to make a couple of changes to base Nightmare to bring it up to scratch a little bit, but I think that could be potentially an option. You could look at some existing bosses that maybe just don't have a lot of drops, like, as maybe KBD, you give them the Harm Orb or something, right? Or the Eldritch Orb, and you give it a different boss a different orb. Maybe you retheme them, because it might be a bit weird that all these different bosses have orbs. But there's options like that you could definitely do.
I think if Fasani is to be tweaked apart from the rate stuff, making Nightmare, not the Fasani's version, just like honestly, Fasani's is just a better fight than Nightmare, and so Nightmare could just do with getting the Fasani's treatment, even if it means becoming a little bit more
Yeah.
punishing in
I
its
think we
damage space.
pulled that. It
Yeah,
failed.
it failed.
Yeah, I think we asked, like, do you want us to like make a lot of the changes that we're doing to Fasani's to regular Nightmare?
Oh, was this
Maybe it was a
before?
bad question. Maybe people were confused or something. But yeah, we did
Was
poll
this
something like that.
before the Fasani's changes came out, or was it like after? Maybe I just don't remember the poll.
It was as Fasani's was basically getting added to the main game, I think, or it was like after it got added and before it was about to get changed again or something.
In that case, I think it would pass today because I feel like maybe people didn't have the opportunity to like
possibly
fully understand the Fasani situation yet. Because like, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine anyone being like, no, please, I want Nightmare. I don't want to one shot the the sleep what is it called, the parasite.
Yes.
You know, I love just whiffing my hits on that and then healing Nightmare. It's so much fun. Like I can't imagine a lot of people make that argument.
I did so much solo regular Nightmare back then before Fasani's even existed.
That's
oh my god, that was so miserable.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, that's like an 18-minute fight, right? Like it's just miserable.
It was so long. It was so punishing.
So many brews.
It's like flick the entire thing.
Oh my god, yeah. Like, I can't even imagine. Maybe that's like the next inspiration when it comes to how many brews you need per kill. I don't know if you use brews for Nightmare though. I feel like if you're doing solo Nightmare,
I think I used hard food and like one or two brews for emergencies, but like
yeah, that's valid.
Yeah,
because the chip damage probably gets like super tedious. No.
Yeah, you had Fury as well, Blood Fury.
Oh yeah, see, I'm an Iron Man that doesn't like thieving, so I do not have one of those yet. Which is why I'm so excited. I was an Iron Man
who got like 16 Blood Furies or something.
Oh my god,
everywhere.
I am so excited for this new Slayer creatures coming out. By the way, I hope you guys cook with them, the Venators, because they drop the Blood Fury. Yeah. So I'm like, oh my god, and that gives me a bit more like leeway to bring like a SRA to top. Before we even get even deeper into the reward space, just really quick side tangent about the Soul Reaper Axe. It's a very interesting weapon. It's probably one of the coolest looking weapons in the game. But it also just feels like it's very punishing for not too many reasons. Like I like the stacking mechanic in some ways. I do like that niche for it, but I feel like it draining so much of your health like flattens where you use it too much. And even if that weren't the case, it still wouldn't be better than the Scythe on every boss other than Vardorvis, which is already better than the Scythe. So I feel like by making it less punishing, it would still have its own niche as an upgrade over the Bludgeon as a crush weapon, and just maybe like an upgrade over the Nox Halley as a slash weapon, which is good because it takes a lot more time and effort to get than the Nox Halley. Has there been any consideration of potentially making that a little bit less punishing, maybe cutting the damage you take in half or something like that, or do you guys feel like it's fine?
Yeah, I think at the time, at the time when we were releasing Soul Reaper Axe, sentiment around the Scythe was already really low. So the idea of releasing a weapon that competed with Scythe was like very scary and not something we wanted to. That's kind of why it has this like a gimmicky restriction on it to like hamper its use cases even more, to like pull it further away from Scythe's use cases, basically.
Yeah.
These days, like I feel like people were probably okay. Like Scythe's got a lot of use cases now. We released quite a few bosses in a row that Scythe's good at. We buffed Scythe. I think now like the restriction and like the downside of like the health mechanic and stuff is kind of just irrelevant. But I think getting rid of it, like maybe it'll be fine. And I'm being a bit overly cautious, but I kind of get paid to be overly cautious. Like, of
course,
it's old school RuneScape. We don't want to break shit randomly. But I think there might be an awkward amount of use cases now that the health is kind of useful for, that players might be attached to, but so that makes it like even more awkward to change. Maybe we could just delete it. Maybe we could just reduce it. Maybe I'm completely overthinking it, but that'd be my kind of worries. Like we put a blog out saying we're going to remove it, and then we get a bunch of people start coming out the woodwork with like, no, you're ruining my niche use case. And then we have to have like a toggle on it or something. And it's just like, why does this weapon have a toggle? It just makes you take damage. It makes no sense.
I definitely get that. I again, it's one of those things where I'm like, maybe a sneaky poll here and there just this even gauge player sentiment, because you never know sometimes with people, who's the vocal minority, who isn't, before until a poll comes out. And
This is something I
yeah,
kind of miss, like, because we
mhm,
don't really do the Wednesday Q&As or the Thursday Q&As as much anymore. They're a
yeah,
bit more ad hoc now, while they used to be every week. And they were pretty useful for just like presenting random topics to talk about that you kind of want to gauge people's opinion on. Because as soon as you put it in a blog or a survey, it feels like too official and like you're committing to something and it's like a really big deal. Or sometimes you just want to float an idea and just
yeah,
see what people think. And if
a
you get a bit of
100%.
buy-in, then maybe you push it a little bit further. And we don't really
Agreed.
have a good vector for that anymore, it feels.
I am so down for that, because I love my SRA. I liked grinding it. I even loved going 2.5 times dry on Vardorvis. Fine with it. I think it looks so cool. I feel like I don't even use it, and it sucks just seeing it sit in my bank, because you could use it on Fasani, but it makes you get one shot unless you're just like brewing up or hard fooding
Yeah.
up every time you get take damage. Keeping the stacks on during the pillars to prioritize is just really frustrating. It makes the fight like hard, like objectively harder for very minimal gain. So I ended up just going back to the bludgeon because it's barely that much worse. And it's just I don't die on Fasani anymore. So like it's a very I can't use it in TOB until maybe you're really experienced or you have a Blood Fury, which requires an external grind on top of the existing grind of the SRA. I don't use it on Seracnus AFK because it's too much upkeep. Like it's there is a yeah. Anyway, you likely agree with me. I feel like there is a there's a space for SRI without being punishing. And to be clear, I love gimmicks on weapons. I think weapons that incentivize more a forethought is way better than weapons that are just like you equip them and you just do more damage. I don't think that's a long-term solution to a lot of end game progression. I think weapons that have a skill ceiling. I think Sebe brought up the blowpipe as a weapon with a huge skill ceiling because it's a 2-tick weapon. And it means that people that are not necessarily super experienced with the game, they likely are losing DPS blowpiping as opposed to other players because they may be running around
Yeah.
too much, missing ticks. So weapons that make you consider more about the game is really cool. And I'm always for that kind of gimmick. I think SRA has that with stacks, and it would continue to have that with stacks outside of the damage. The damage is just on top of that. And another shout out there on like Zarpus, right? The melee Zarpus is not something it's worth doing unless you have a scythe. And when you get a scythe, you get this like huge buff, but it requires more skill to do well, as opposed to just AFK blowpiping, essentially, right? Like there's this cool consideration there. And that's something I've always prioritized whenever I speak to a dev. I'm like, when you guys are making future weapons and even just anything, I want to see weapons that transform my perspective on an encounter or a fight that isn't just I equip it and I deal more damage with it. That to me is a very linear power curve that makes all weapons feel very similar. Like I want to equip something and it just totally transforms my perspective. Are you have you ever played classic WoW?
When it first ever released ages ago.
The only reason I ask is because I always bring up like hunters. They have different speeds on their weapons, and you're always like trying to not clip your auto attacks. You're always trying to make sure that you're
Yeah,
stopping
yeah.
when you're kiting, right? Right. So I love that kind of stuff, and because so many weapons in OSRS are 4 or 5 tick and very rarely go any different direction or are just kind of a just damage. They sometimes start feeling a bit similar. So I love weapons with that. How do you feel about weapons that do like, you know, get a bit maybe gimmicky? Maybe that's maybe too complicated for SRS's sake. I don't know.
I think if anyone's really followed like all the reward polls for the years, they'll probably realize that yeah, I do quite like weird gimmicky things,
Mhm.
maybe a bit too much. And there's definitely been a lot of failed proposals that I've had on various reward blogs of just weird ideas of rewards that haven't really gone anywhere. And I'm not saying that they should have passed or anything. Like I think they usually had very good reasons for not passing. But I think all of those different iterations over the years and failed proposals, it's kind of proven that either the appetite isn't quite there or the space that these gimmicky weapons can exist is very tight. Which means that there probably isn't really a lot of room for loads of these things. And they probably have to be quite simple, like within themselves.
Mhm.
Like players in the game, like old school, like this game shouldn't ever really be perceived as complicated. I don't think, like at its base level. Like it
Yeah.
sure has complicated gameplay and like doing no pillar inferno, like it's like a feat, right? Like there's so much that goes into that. But at the core level, you're clicking to move, you're clicking on an NPC, you're maybe swapping an overhead. That's almost like the entire game, right? Like, and that's like really important. And if you start having these weapons that like you've got to keep track of like three different buff bars and like you got to click the special attack button on every fourth tick and like all this other shit. Like it's just going to end up feeling really oppressive and not very old school.
I
And
yeah.
yeah, that's what I mean by like the space is tight. Like I think there are ideas that can probably work and exist, and Soul Reaper is obviously one of them. And I think Echo Rewards in Raging Echoes kind of tried out a lot of different cool gimmicky weapons,
Mhm.
and I think there's room there. But I don't think there's like loads of space to be like wacky creative or anything.
The space is there is something that I want to touch on because, and this is like the meat of the argument now, is to quickly try to and I've been having such a hard time like explaining this problem. I think that's part of I had made my most controversial video about it, and I don't know if I even explained it well there. Is like there's this trend for the longest time in old school and just in RuneScape in general, where a new boss gets released, it has new power creep attached to it, and then it pivots all of the existing items down a peg. Like they go earlier in the game because that end game has just expanded. And for the longest time, like right, like Barrows released those end game, then at a certain point it became mid game, and now Barrows is like the first boss you do. That's and due to the stat requirement changing, due to the breadth of end game and mid game that exists in RuneScape today. And I thought that was such a clean solution to adding vertical power creep to your game without devaluing existing items. They just have values in different points of progression rather than values only in the end game. And at a certain point, it feels like the that stopped happening. And it's not because developers did it consciously. I don't think you guys are like, yes, it's time to stop that. It's, I think, a natural, not endpoint, but natural pitfall of this of the way that RuneScape itemizes and its stats work. Where around TOB, I want to say, all new endgame content, it requires 99s in your combat stats. It require and it can't grow power too much because of that existing kind of barrier to entry, that it needs to be more incremental. And because it's more incremental, the future endgame content is never going to require the previous one or even demand you have the previous one to do the newest thing. So you end up starting to skip the older content and just prioritizing the newest, most palatable content instead for whatever reason that may be, right? Like I always say, you're skipping Bandos, go Blood Moon to Yama. With the tormented demons synapses. I more recently you have Doom requiring just mid game ranged gear, and then you almost have your Abyss already. TOB can just kind of be ignored for the most part at this point, apart from the Scythe and maybe Avernick. Like because of the Eye of Iac, Sanguinesti has no value, and already was struggling because of the Grazi Rapier with the Fang. There's so much content to me now that feels like it's just cannibalizing itself, as you mentioned. And I'm really concerned, and maybe you can again talk me down the ledge, off the ledge here, or maybe agree with me even if that's the case, where I feel like in like 5 or 10 years, we're going to be getting to points where content gets devalued in a way that is unfamiliar to the RuneScape player. Not like a Barrows, not even like a TOB today, but like fundamentally, like the only thing in that content is going to be either a mega rare or nothing at all. And that is troubling. It's a troubling thought to me. I don't know if you agree with that.
What do you mean
Mhm.
by downplaying content they're not even familiar with?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I think you said you'd be like like new content would be either downgrading or downplaying content that players aren't even familiar with.
Oh, okay. Oh, what I meant is essentially like at a certain point, when a new piece of content releases, apart from the Scythe because it scales differently, like so much of TOB today is just, I think 84, 85% of the value, the GP per hour, whatever, just stems from the Scythe. And and having content where like the vast majority of it has been power crept, but that content itself, unlike Barrows, didn't pivot down in someone's progression path, like didn't become something people do earlier on in their progression. It ends up just being skipped entirely. or only approached for a singular function, which is the scythe, which is a frustrating way to approach a piece of content because it's one of the hardest items in the game to get. So I'm concerned that like more content is going to start feeling devalued in the same way a lot of the TOB items have been, or a lot of items from like Bandos have been, although they're components to
Right.
Torva today. So I don't know. I don't know if that's ever, yeah. I'm curious.
In general, I do think it's a legit worry. And obviously, yeah, we are already kind of seeing it a bit. Like reward space is hard, and some of the space we're trying to occupy, effectively other rewards are already occupying, but we're basically just earning it by the players. And like in this case, players were okay with Sang being devalued, right? Like they might not have been happy about it, but they were still excited about the Eye of Aya coming out and thought that was a good drop, right?
Yeah.
And like so that's obviously what got it through a poll. And that might just keep happening more and more, and more time will pass. Like maybe we'll release some better gloves than ferocious gloves, and that'll kind of hurt Hydra. And maybe we'll release another Dragon Hunter weapon that devalues lands. Like I can see that happening more and more. And if the players are okay with that, then fine, right? I don't think that's necessarily like a big problem or anything. But yeah, you are getting that problem where I don't think we'd ever be in a position where a piece of content is like irrelevant, and I think that's the fundamentally problematic part. Like if you're just never encouraged to go to Bandos, right? Like as much as
Yeah.
Oathblade hurt that, like there's still a very good reason to go to Bandos, and it's still like a very valid path and has its place in the game. I can't imagine we'd ever get to the point where yeah, individual pieces of content like there's literally no reason to engage with them.
Mm-hmm.
At least big pieces of content, like you could maybe argue even like Barrows, like there's no real anymore, but it's probably borderline, like still very easy, still very chill, still very low level. It's still fairly good money for what it is. All the consistent runes as well. Requires like no gear at all. Perilous Moons is actually probably quite a bit of a step up, to be honest.
And the cool
In
thing
all
about
regards.
Perilous Moons also requires that tank having the Barrows tank gear. So it's like a kind of a
Yeah.
clever way to facilitate. It's still getting
I
that.
painfully did all my Perilous Moons without Barrow's gear.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
I just
Blood Moon.
I think I grinded for like 80 defense and like 95 strength or something, and then got zombie axe and then just plowed my way through it.
That's brutal. Did you
I
do
just
like the
couldn't be
step
bothered
under?
routing Barrows in. Yeah,
Did
I
you
just
do?
step under a Blood
Yeah,
Moon.
that probably is a way to make Blood Moon more possible, I guess. Because yeah, oh my
Yeah.
god. But it was really fun for me to like understand that okay, there's a abject value to getting Barrows. So I did my Barrows grind, got my tank sets, and then went to Perilous, and then got my power armor sets. That was a really fun like point of progression there. And shout out to the Perilous Moon sets. They are some of the most exciting pieces of armor in the entire game, just from their set effects alone. Like Eclipse is so
Yep.
cool, has a cool reward space prior to the Bofa, and doesn't make the Bofa rush as mandatory feeling, I guess you could say. So very cool there. But when it comes to like TOB, a situation where I guess the concern there would be that TOB released in 2018 and it was an end game piece of content. It's 2026 and it's still an end game piece of content, which on its face isn't the worst thing ever. But when you consider the trend of just about every single piece of old school RuneScape and just RuneScape content prior, that does feel a bit weird, right? Like it feels weird that Zulrah came out and it was the hardest content with the end game, and now it's like a kind of a mid to late game boss you do, right? And still has some value there. You look at every Slayer boss, I guess you could say, has
I think the fundamental problem here is it just feels kind of cheeky, but I feel like it's kind of going back to the point of the drop tables having too many items again.
Mhm.
If Grazi Rapier, like even back when Grazi Rapier was released, I don't think Grazi Rapier justified like a 100-hour grind. Like even when it was technically the best installed melee weapon for a short period of time before Dragon Hunter lands, and
Yeah.
ignoring Scythe, right? Like it's a best installed one-handed, not in 3x3 melee weapon at the time. Like even then, a 100-hour grind for that was probably inappropriate, but it had to be kind of a 100-hour grind because it was on a big drop table with a bunch of other stuff, and that kind of like has to spread it out and causes a bunch of problems. Same with the Sang. I think the reason why we saw for a long time like the down predding, I can't remember what phrase you used, but like what your example with Barrows, where it's like okay, Barrows just
pivoting like downstream, right? Like going earlier.
Pivoting downstream, yeah. It's like I think the reason we saw that for a long period of time is that in a lot of individual grinds were actually appropriate for what they were. Like to get some good tank gear from Barrows, it's like a 10-hour, 20-hour grind, maybe, right? To get like 2 or 3 pieces that you're happy with. Maybe not even that. And like that was fine because then when we introduced like a 50-hour grind, it fit in really nicely. Like, okay, go do the shorter grind to then help the grind after that. And that was okay then. But now we have like TOB that's, like a 300, 400-hour grind, like fully complete or whatever. If we release like TOB2 that's got better rewards in all the nature, you're still not going to go spend 200 or 300 hours grinding out TOB to get the rewards to then grind TOB2 in reality, right? You even for Scythe, you're probably not going to do that. That's probably still not mathematically going to save you enough time to justify doing that. So I think it only really works when like individual grinds give like appropriate levels of rewards, and having a high quantity of rewards on a drop table just directly hurts that significantly. Like if TOB only had the Scythe and it was like a 60-hour grind or something like that, like just ballpark, like I can imagine that fits in really well. And like the Grazi Rapier is on like a separate boss that was like a 15, 20-hour grind. Like I can imagine that that pivoting downstream would actually still happen. But because it's attached to this gigantic grind, it's just never going to efficiently route into anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the fundamental problem there is like we've made all these really big leaps over the past like 10 years of like releasing raids and Inferno and these endgame bosses and stuff. And it's like, oh, this is a really big upgrade and it's a really big difficulty like spike. So we're going to give you like a drop table that matches that. But then we can't like do that again, right? We can't have top 2 that's like 5 times as hard as the previous raid and takes like twice as long or something like that. It would feel grossly inappropriate. So then we have it roughly similar, right? It's like a little bit more difficult. It matches the stats of the current era. The drop table is maybe roughly the same. Maybe it's even slightly more generous, but then you make that more generous. Now, are you doing top 2 before top 1? Like, our game is not built in a way that like you need certain items, right? It's all about like efficiency and hours and mathematics, like building out your route. And I think like the end game landscape just doesn't really support it.
Yeah, I agree. It is specifically an issue that affects raids more than anything, because of the length of the grind, because of how many items there are, and simultaneously to that, because of just the way that difficulty has become handled in old school RuneScape, right? Like that's another point I wanted to bring up, where nowadays most difficulty in OSRS is purely mechanical. There's no like Zulrah jatting you for 40s over and over again, right? There's no Olm jatting you for 40s over and over again. Nowadays, even chip damage is like a taboo for a lot of people, which was a way to like essentially say, hey, you do not have the HP to be here, buddy. Go back to grinding, right? Like that. Even that alone created essentially a lock and a key that people need to open. TOB still has that too. Like there's a lot. Zverzik is a asshole when it comes to the chip damage sometimes, and that's like that's a way to balance it out. But simultaneously, the moment a new piece of content comes out that has ranged gear that is as good, if not better than Masori's dead. It's dead. It's dead. The second a new mage set comes out that's from a boss that's better than Ancestral or as good as Ancestral's dead, because Ancestral is a multi-100-hour grind for the full set unless you're super lucky, while this is going to be a regular boss that's going to take 60 100 hours to complete. And that's like a very different kind of like approach there. And on top of all of that, Cox is way less intuitive, way harder to learn than any new boss. And I've always maintained this, like, I would rather learn Yama solo even, but duo especially, as compared to a Door Alter Grardor, which is unbelievably punishing, kind of annoying. It's easy when you get it, but if you're dying, it's like a 20-minute reset time,
Yeah, no, I get you. I think road space is hard, and like the raids do present just a big problem, and just long grinds in general just present a big problem because how do you build upon a long grind? Like I think people quoted us quite a lot when I can't remember the exact situation, but it was like the Arcane Spirit Shield, where it's like that's a really long grind, and then we have like another really long grind from like a raid, and then requiring an account to like do 2 of these really long grinds. And like at the end of the day, Word of Elderness was like fine as like a reward. Like it wasn't particularly exciting because Shadow just cannibalized it immediately. But like fundamentally, just a strong mage offhand was okay. But it's just having a long grind that requires another long grind that requires another long grind. Like like what is the end game there, right? Like of old school RuneScape's itemization. Like, do you need ancestral, and then you combine it with like raids 4 armor to create this new armor, and then raid 7 comes out and you combine it with that? Does every best in slot item just become a raids item because that's like the pinnacle of the game? And is that okay? Like, probably not. Like, there's a lot of questions there that we're just going to get closer and closer to being forced to answer. And
Yeah.
whilst I am trying to do things like not behind the scenes, but even just like elemental weaknesses and stuff, right? Just trying to like give us some space and like figure out things and set up some infrastructures for the future to open these things up a little bit. It's really hard, and it's really hard in a game that's like as slow moving as old school RuneScape. This is something I kind of wanted to ode back to earlier about Nex, where like in my mind back then, I don't think this is really correct, but in my mind back then, creating a boss that was like really difficult, like stats wise, I think theoretically opens up a lot of reward space for
Yeah.
like having items feel impactful and like really strong there. Like whenever we add overloads one day, like they're gonna be fucking amazing at next. They're gonna feel so good. Like when we added the Fang, that felt so good at next. Like whenever we added Masori, like that was a massive upgrade at next. Like the defense, the
Yeah.
mage defense, and the gear. Like there's so many of those things that feel really good because next is just this massive stat check. And you're right, having more and more bosses that are just skill checks pulls away from that. But equally, having a bunch of bosses that are just like a bunch of damage checks as well isn't very fun either. So it's like
Yeah.
there's no silver bullet here, right? We're just trying to like do our best and just plot our way through it and just make old school the best it realistically can be, and reworking all this stuff and making the best combat system ever that fully fixes all these problems would fundamentally break old school RuneScape. So that's just not an option. We're just trying to figure out our best step by step.
It's a balance between systemic balance, like making the systems better, as opposed to mechanical balance, making the boss more fun. And sometimes these two things feel like they're butting heads, you know, because as you pointed out,
Absolutely
Nex,
are.
yeah, Nex is an asshole. Like Nex is just just absolutely such a miserable thing to just chug bruise through sometimes. You know, some people love it, but chug and bruise, you know, it is what it is. And when it comes to bosses like Yama, on the other hand, that's a really fun, amazing fight. Really fun. So is Doom. But if you're doing that fight perfectly, it's like almost no loss on anything, right? You take maybe tiny, tiny bits of chip damage. Sometimes it's like such a drastic like difference there. And I think good players, and just I think most players, prefer getting better at something and feel like their supplies aren't suffering still. Or at least not to the level that they would be on like the more chip damage heavy stuff. There's a reason why Baba, you know, was changed. There's a reason why Akka was changed with their chip damage, especially on higher invocations, because stuff like this. And I don't know what the future looks like, but some of my big like focus points would be to, and maybe this is not OSRS, and that's always going to be my position here in the community, I guess. So if like someone that's advocating for more quote unquote liberal changes, and then have more conservative members be like, no, 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 let's dial it back a little bit, which is fine. But like things like armor to me should, like if we go to a point where stat checks become a little bit more of a thing than they are today, like for example, if we start integrating chip damage on certain boss fights in a more intense fashion once more, I say we again as if I'm developing it, I'm not, but like conceptually, if that starts happening again, what if tank armor would be mitigating chip damage? What if I pitched this to Mod Rice, but like, what if at breakpoints of 100, tank armor would just reduce your total damage taken by 1, like a 1 flat damage increase? So if you have 300 stab defense, stab attacks against you do 3 less damage. And on fights with constant 6s and 7s of chip damage, that will be a very noticeable thing to choose to, especially when you're learning. Like things like that can create. Yap aside, ramble aside, I think that as we are right now, and Rich coming from a new player, I guess, but I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see like a stat rework for OSRS. I just don't envision a place where players are happy with raids becoming devalued. And I think players are going to rather have more stats, or stats have more values, or something like that. I don't know. Has that ever been something you've considered as well? Like, what if we make armor something more tangible, right? For example.
It's been talked about a lot. I think fundamentally where I am right now is like 5, 10 years is a long time,
Yeah.
and a lot can change, and we don't know what old school is going to look like in that time. and the team will be better. The place will be different in terms of like the landscape of the game and stuff like that, or the landscape of players and what they care about, what they think. We're just gonna have to take it year by year and see how it comes in reality, and just do our best to like set it up. And I'm fairly optimistic we'll get.
Mhm.
Old school's lived like 25 years at this point. I don't see why it can't live in
Oh,
reality.
100% agreed with you.
It might get harder, but we're also going to get better, is a reality. And like, I'm fully on board with whatever those challenges will be. I don't think it's anything we really have to like actually worry about, but I think they're good things to think about.
Things like elemental weaknesses are an interesting thing. I'm curious. You mentioned that you like have been considering them a lot, and I do like the idea and like what they really mean for the game. Something I kind of wished happened with elemental weaknesses, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Is I wish they were gear reliant rather than creature reliant. Like I wish a creature had like elemental weakness, like a water weakness on a fire giant, and then you would itemize for that rather than the fire giant just having elemental weakness and you just bring your magic gear. Because I feel like if it was the opposite, if you were itemizing for it, that would just intrinsically create reward
I
space.
think we'll get there. Like
You'll get there.
technically, the
Okay.
itemization's already there, right? Like you're supposed to technically bring different runes, right, to bring a different
Yeah.
spell. It's just
Yeah.
incredibly minor right now. But I'm fully on board with us eventually getting to the point. Maybe your Staff of War has better water damage versus just
Yeah.
actually being infinite water runes, and you could do that with armor sets, and maybe there's an amulet or something like that that you got to tune to different elements and stuff. Like I think there's a lot of space, but that only exists because of the weaknesses on monsters. Right? It had to start there first.
100%. And that's why
And always
I'm
baby
such a
steps.
big proponent of this kind of stuff. I think weaknesses are very thematically appropriate. They've been implemented pretty well, especially in the early and mid game where you're utilizing them a bit more. Like really cool stuff there, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds for elemental weaknesses. I love. I was talking to Sebe a bit about this in my last visit of the podcast, and just also just generally thinking about a lot about it, like ways to make skills more useful. Like imagine like, for rune crafting, you could like imbue unique rings that have elemental bonuses attached to them. They're already color coded for their individual weaknesses. What if you could put like 5,000 water runes in a unique new ring and then imbue it in an altar, and now it has a 5% increased water damage, attached to that. Like things like that would add a lot of flavor, cool stuff with jewelry, maybe considering jewelry's in a kind of a sometimes a bit a weird spot, especially in the early and mid game. I'm curious when it comes to jewelry stuff. I love the light bearer. I don't know how you feel about it. I really love the light bearer, and I would love to see a world where some jewelry, specifically maybe ring slots or even just necklace slots, but maybe ring slots only, would take on a more of an effect driven landscape rather than just be passive stats like Ultor rings and stuff. Because what's going to be the next ring over the Ultor? It's going to be 16 strength bonus from God knows where, right? Like I feel like having effect driven rings creates maybe more space for itemization. I don't know if you agree with me on that though. It's a complicated one.
Um, I'm not inherently opposed to it or anything. I think my initial reaction would be, I think it's quite important for an old school character, especially in PvP, for your kit to be quite visible.
Oh yeah.
And I think having probably fairly impactful effects on the effectively only invisible slot a player can wear would maybe be slightly problematic, but maybe I'm overthinking it.
No, that's a great point, honestly. I didn't even think about that. That's a really, really good point. And a very challenging one to work around. I know Sebe wanted a second ring slot for purely like passive effects. Maybe those can just be disabled for PvP. I know
I've always loved the idea of a second ring slot, but how would
yeah,
you equip it, man? How do you equip two rings?
that's
And what
true.
does the UX look like for that?
That is legitimately impossible. But similarly, like my idea was instead of a second ring slot is to just create a pocket slot, like a World of Warcraft esque trinket slot
Yep.
with unique effects attached to it. That already kind of exists. It kind of cannibalized by range in some ways, but you guys were mitigating that with a quiver. So like very interesting space there. But like a pocket slot, like for blessings, and if there was a pocket slot that existed separate from the ammo slot, you could create blessings and stuff like that with actual effects on them rather than like one prayer bonus because
I
sacrificing that
think
for ammo
creating
doesn't
new
matter.
new like set item slots and stuff, a lot of great potential. A lot
Yeah.
finicky, like the interface, and does it render on your characters? Probably some engine work, blah blah. But I do think there's a lot of potential there, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if we touched that in the next few years. Really.
Hmm. Well, I want to say one final thing, or I ask you, I should say one final thing. So I always ask this to the guests on the show, and obviously you've been a champ. It's been a multi-hour long session, and I appreciate your input. If you were, let's say you were the old school RuneScape developer god, you could snap your finger, and you could change one thing about the game, major or minor, but you could. It doesn't, not considering budget, time, whatever. If you could snap your finger, what would be something you change about old school RuneScape today?
This is always a really funny one. I think when we used to host Q&As and introduce new JMods on live stream, we would ask them that question in front of all the players. And like thinking back on it, it's like really toxic. Because like that's like the easiest way to just get them roasted. Like, say something really controversial in front of people that don't even know you.
Yeah.
We'd also do it internally as well, but yeah, I think most people just give like a really cop-out answer. I think for a long time, most people's answer was like, "Oh, get rid of the jewelry."
Get rid of the what?
The Duel Arena.
Oh, the Duel Arena. Okay,
yeah. What I do? Reduce every drop table to 1 item. No. A hard one to answer off the box. There's like lots of small things, but picking like one like a really meaty thing that would be A, good for the game, but B, probably quite difficult to. Is this like I wouldn't have to do the work? Like it's just I can just
you can just snap
get the output of the work immediately.
Exactly.
I mean, have infinite itemization, figure out like how that works into the next into perpetuity, really.
Well, what kind of system would you integrate to hopefully fix itemization if you didn't have to consider budget, time, knowledge, whatever gaps?
Yeah, I'll give 2 answers. One's like a serious answer. One's kind of just like a fun, like basically a game mode idea. And the serious answer, I'd say, would be to somehow do like a long-term rebalancing of like pretty much every item in the game, every piece of content in the game, like readdress every drop table, almost like a resculpt what progression looks like in old school RuneScape into like today's era. Like, because like we've talked about a lot, the past like 3 or 4 years, like I think there's been a lot of really great updates, but the reward space is getting tighter and tighter, and it's starting to create progression problems and skipping a lot of content, and like some items not feeling very exciting or rewarding to get, and that's just going to get worse over time. But like fixing that like in one fell swoop would be amazing, because that would easily just make like the next 10-15 years breeze in that regard. So that'd be my kind of serious answer, and I do think that's theoretically possible. It'd just be a massive work and probably like a year's worth of blogs back and forth and a lot of compromises. Be a lot of work. The fun answer is I kind of want to go through like all the old quest bosses in the game and like make them actually bosses. Like virtually every early quest boss in the game is either safe spot it with mage or just safe spot it in general, or just pray melee and whack it, or don't even pray melee and just whack it. Like very few early quest bosses actually have strategies or anything like that, any actual mechanics, because they weren't really figured out back then, right? But like imagine Giant Rock actually had mechanics and you're like dodging gales of wind and it was spawning its ads and stuff like that, as opposed to just standing against a wall and just attacking it with a range. Like
it's so
I feel
funny
like that would be really cool, because I think that would make every new account like so much more interesting and exciting. It would make quests so much more exhilarating to complete. I think a lot of our latest quests, Ed especially has been working on with like Beneath Cursed Sands, like there's a lot of really cool boss fights with
and
I think that's fantastic and just makes everything feel so much better, and like teach the players earlier as well how to play the game and like what in-game's kind of like. I would love to do that.
I just want to point out how hilarious it is that you brought up the Giant Rock as the example there, when it's like the first boss in the game with actual mechanics. Like that was added, like because it has
it barely has a mechanic.
It has a falling rock. And that changed
God.
the which crazy thing about the Giant Rock. It's so funny. It was a topic of conversation in the prior Mod Rice podcast too, because that was the first ever boss in the game with an actual like tile-based dodge mechanic ever added. And I believe it was Mod Ash who coded that in. So crazy that you brought that up. So I'm like, wow, what a cool like segue, I guess. So I love that. I agree, though. I love the idea of adding more. I think that based on what I've seen, a lot of the WoW players that have been checking the game out, me included, I guess, on all this kind of stuff, say is that they wish that they could see the value or the depth of the PvM in old school RuneScape faster. Scurious really did a great job. That Scurious is what got me into the PvM in old school. So shout out to Scurious, because before, well, I don't even know what the first thing I would have done if Scurious never came out. So it like, I love that. And I think getting people like the earlier you get into like dodging something, avoiding something, doing something with your character, the better, right? Like the cow boss that's coming
cow
out.
boss coming soon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'm like, that's exactly what the game needs, in my opinion. I love that idea because it really does have some depth there. So I love that answer. And of course, I love the rebalance.
I'm super excited for cow boss. Like,
I'm super excited.
I'm super curious what people give it, but I think it really does fill this like weird little niche in the early game, and I think it's also just kind of a cool encounter. Like, even if you're like a max player, like you are gonna basically two-shot the boss. But if you're making a new account and like doing that, I think it'd be quite fun, like leagues and stuff like that. And the hard mode is its own beast as well.
Wait, there's a hard mode?
Yeah, this is like effectively like an awakened cow boss. We did talk about it on the summit.
I must have missed that. That sounds amazing. I cannot wait till that happens. Holy!
It's just wait. A cosmetic, I think. But
well, before you say that though, are there awakeners orbs?
No.
Okay, thank God. Oh, thank God, boys, we're getting it. We're getting in. Okay, I can actually do it. Yeah, I'm very excited. That's actually so cool. I love that idea. So I'm really excited to see how people go. World first, free to play cow boss. Really excited for that. I love the idea too of rebalancing stuff. Something I've always been a fan of is just kind of going back and like pivoting every single crafting requirement down 10 levels. That just makes sense to me. 70 for a glory is insane. A 60 would be a bit more tenable. 50 for a power Ami would actually create a level of progression in your jewelry. Stuff like that, even for Slayer, frankly.
Again, it's just like the modern era, right? Like 70 for a glory back then was like completely fine because it was like the end game item, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But, like these days, it just feels a bit odd, and like it's almost like, I don't want to say we should add like 120s or something like that, but if we theoretically had 120s, I feel like a lot of old school skill progression probably would have made a lot more sense. Because that's how the progression probably would have led up, ignoring the sheer amount of XP you would have needed for 120s. But in terms of just the levels alone,
that's exactly 100%. That's 100% how I feel about it too. Like I think there is a genuine argument, and I think eventually it will happen. It just matters when the player base, is open to it. Like things like, the Araxor amulet is a great example of just how weird, like, or of figuring that out. Because like, yeah, tormented, whatever the fuck it's called.
So fucking awkward, man.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, it's so bizarre because the Araxor requirement being 86 or 87, that makes perfect sense. Like, it makes so much sense. But then when you consider the gorillas, it's much different. It's very strange. So I love that idea. I support that with Slayer too. I don't think we need 85 Slayer for Abyssal Demons anymore. I don't think we need 875 for Gargoyles. I think Slayer desperately needs more exciting enemies and drops early on, just to give a bit more like, oomph to the skill. But regardless, I love that. My answer for this is always, it's a meme at this point. A parry mechanic. Have you heard how much I'm obsessed over a parry mechanic?
I mean, if you've played any good like Souls-like, or I'm not even Souls-like these days, every genre is implemented these days, but the parry mechanics just feel good, man. They're just fun.
They're fun, and I feel like my whole thing of adding like quote unquote depth, even though it already exists into OSRS for reward space reasons mainly, is to never make it a new like mechanic you're interacting with, in that like it's not like, oh, now I have a special button I'm pressing here. Like, that to me doesn't translate to OSRS. But what does is stuff that is just enhancing the incentive to do things that people are already doing. So prayer, like activating prayers, like stuff like that. You're already doing that on most PvM encounters. So creating a system where you could like activate a prayer, whatever it may be, at the correct tick that you're going to take damage, and then essentially being able to parry that with like, imagine it being like as if you prayed correctly against it with a protection prayer, and then maybe your next hit against them is like one tick faster or something, which would incentivize a deeper engagement in the encounter once you're comfortable with it. But if you miss it, you're taking the hit off prayer, so it's a very like, risk reward kind of situation. It would add reward space with like items that could give you certain buffs, or maybe like, oh, you get 3 prayer points back if you do it correctly, or whatever it may be. It could like it, add a parry mechanic, guys. You know,
I'm
old
gonna
school
be the
runes.
really boring system designer guy, and like as much as I love pyro mechanics and I've played every Souls-like game and talked to me about Sekiro, like I love it all,
Oh
but
yeah,
um, I think that the fundamental problem you have with adding it in old school, like widespread, is the game wasn't balanced around
yeah,
it. Reality, right? So what you would end up doing is that, like, oh, if you parry, you gain like 20% accuracy or like one max hit because you don't want to like disturb the entire game and make it so like every boss is like felt this. Because like, what about like Zulrah that attacks every 3-6, right? Like, if it gave you 50% damage buff every 3-6, it'd be absolutely insane. And there's other bosses that attack every 7-6, and like the game is just fundamentally not balanced and created with parry in mind. So you'd end up having to pick something awkwardly weak just so it didn't like destroy the game. And then you end up creating this parry mechanic that isn't very satisfying to interact with because it's so weak, right?
yeah,
Like, these are always the problems that you just have, like retrofitting things into games like widespread, and that's why like virtually most things we do these days are locked to a weapon. If
yeah.
they're locked to a weapon, you can make it satisfying, and it's locked to that, and it can be in its own niche and everything else.
That
Like,
that was
widespread mechanics in the game are just a fundamental problem.
no, no. And listen, that's why my thing is mostly like
Yeah,
like a random thing. But my original incarnation of the parry mechanic was actually just one that is constrained to rapier type weapons, and it would retroactively make the Grazi rapier not horrible, and frustrating to obtain, because now you have a weapon where I don't maybe imagine like a situation where it has more like a SRA kind of spec rather than like a actual thing that drains your bar, where maybe like you can activate it after a certain amount of hits, and you would like deflect the next
yeah.
attack and immediately hit back again. That could create a use
I
case
think
for
stuff like
certain.
that'd be sick.
Yeah, I think yeah,
I've played around with ideas like for a while and just never like settled on anything I really like, but I do think there's potential.
yeah. I am my claim to fame for old school RuneScape, you know, in however many years, is I'm going to be the guy who brought a weapon into the game with a parry mechanic through via influencing every single developer I'm talking to on Discord. And then it's going to be terrible and broken like the Shadow, and everyone's going to hate me, and I'm going to have to leave and go back, I don't know, to World of Warcraft or something. But before that, I am very parry forward. Anyway, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. It was an awesome conversation. It was so interesting to hear you talk about the game and your thought process about it. And I'm sure we didn't even get to some topics. I wanted to hear your thoughts on like PoE and the way you feel like those systems get integrated to OSRS, what can and what can't. But I'm sure we can always keep that for another time. So, Mod Arcane, it's been a pleasure, man. Yeah. Do you have any like last words? Do you want to shout something out, mention something? Please, the stage is yours.
It has been a pleasure. I've loved being on. I apologize to any viewers that have just listened for 3 hours of me just kind of ripping ideas apart because of how awkward and complicated things seemingly are.
No, listen,
I
that's that.
appreciate that. It might be like depressing sometimes. I'm just breaking shit apart all the time.
No, I think that's
My
amazing.
brain's coded.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Yeah. Again, always welcome to come back again, give more insights. When we learn more about Raids 4, we can have a giant argument about why the Mega Rare doesn't have a passive that parries things. I don't know. Whatever it may be. I am very thrilled to see what happened, and I'm super excited to see what you work on next. So, Mod Arcane, thank you so much, and I'll see you around.